Hey guys, how are you all? Welcome to Let's Start Story on What If Naruto and Satoru Gojo Create Harem in Jujutsu Kaisen World. So do 4 blue hearts. Comment, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video, and please share with your friends and watch till end. Also check out Patreon for I have upload Naruto X Rias and Akino uncensored spicy version, link in description. Naruto was dying. It wasn't some blaze of glory, not the grand, heroic finale he might have imagined. No, it was messy, quiet, and far too soon. Blood loss had taken him in the Valley of the End. Right after he and Sasuke, battered and broken, managed to cancel the infinite Tsukuyomi. The world was saved, but the price had been steep. He'd known it was coming. The way Sasuke sapped away his chakra and the Chidori that took away more than just his arm were clear signs. Even as he tried to lighten the mood with his usual goofy grin, his jokes landing flat against the tension in the air. He felt the life slipping away from him. Kakashi had been the first to show up, his mask stained with dirt and exhaustion. His Sharingan was gone, leaving him looking strangely ordinary and painfully human. Behind him came Sakura, her face pale with panic as she ran to Naruto's side, her hands glowing with the desperate light of medical ninjutsu. Naruto had waved them off. "Don't bother, Sakura-chan," he'd said. His voice hoarse but steady. "Save your chakra. You'll need it for rebuilding, you know, doctor stuff." He'd laughed, weak and breathless, but his blue eyes still sparkled with a hint of mischief. Kakashi had knelt beside him, his hands shaking as he tried to apply pressure to the wound. "Don't talk like that, Naruto," he'd said, his tone sharp, but his voice cracked at the edges. "You're going to be fine." Naruto had just smiled, that same damn smile he always wore when things were at their worst. "You're gonna be Hokage now, Kakashi-sensei. Make sure you don't slack off, okay?" Sakura had sobbed, her hands trembling as she worked frantically, ignoring his protests. "You can't die, Naruto. You're supposed to become Hokage. You promised." "I know, Sakura-chan." His voice had softened, his gaze flickering between them. "But, it's okay. Really. I'm happy. You guys are safe. The world's safe. That's enough for me." And just like that, he was gone. No grand speeches, no final declarations. Just a boy, smiling until his very last breath. The funeral was unlike anything the shinobi world had ever seen. People from every village gathered in Konoha, their differences set aside. At least for one day. The streets were packed, filled with those who had come to pay their respects to the boy who had saved them all. Naruto Uzumaki, the eternal hero. The C.E. Rimini was held under the clear blue sky, the kind of day Naruto would have loved. His body rested on a platform draped in the colors of Konoha, surrounded by flowers and mementos left by those who had come to say goodbye. History book would later testify how 29 tins of flowers were placed over his grave. His headband, scratched and worn, was placed on his chest, a symbol of everything he had fought for. The Hokage mountain bore a new face by the end of the week. Kakashi Hatake, now the 6th Hokage, had made sure of it. Naruto's smiling visage was carved into the stone, standing tall beside the Hokages he had always admired. It was the least they could do for the boy who had given everything. Kakashi even wrote a book on him, The Tale of Naruto Uzumaki. People spoke of him as if he were still alive. His name whispered in reverence across the villages. Stories of his bravery, his stubbornness, and his unshakable belief in his friends spread like wildfire. Children looked up to him as a symbol of hope. Shinobi aspired to his courage, and those who had known him mourned the loss of someone who had never stopped believing in a better tomorrow. Naruto Uzumaki. The boy who never gave up. The boy who saved the world. He was hailed as the eternal hero. And how true it was. Because nobody ever forgot him. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. Naruto blinked twice. His eyes, heavy and unfocused, struggled to adjust to the overwhelming brightness around him. Everything was light, soft, blinding, and completely unfamiliar. He tried to make sense of it, but his thoughts felt slow, almost sluggish, like they were wading through water. Where was he? The last thing he remembered was the Valley of the End. The blood. The pain. Kakashi-sensei's face above his, panicked and desperate. Sakura's sobs. Then, nothing. Now, here he was. Somewhere too bright, too warm, and entirely too strange. His body felt foreign, as if it wasn't his own. He tried to lift an arm, to sit up, but nothing. His muscles didn't respond. Panic began to creep in. Then, a shadow moved through the light. A giant figure, a silhouette of a woman, came into view. Her presence was calming, almost divine. She leaned over him, her face obscured by the light. He felt her hand, soft and impossibly gentle, caress his head. There was an odd familiarity to her touch, like he'd known her forever, though he couldn't quite place it. Was this Sakura-chan? Did she save him after all? His eyes strained, desperate for clarity. No, this wasn't Sakura. The hair was wrong, too white, almost silver. The figure was taller, too, more elegant. He tried to speak, to ask who she was. To demand answers, but no words came. Instead, a pitiful gurgle escaped his lips. What? Another gurgle followed, this one wetter and more embarrassing. Naruto's eyes widened in horror. He tried again, forcing himself to form words, but his mouth wouldn't cooperate. Only nonsensical sounds came out. And that's when it hit him. He couldn't move. Not properly, anyway. His arms were weak and floppy. His legs unresponsive. Everything about his body felt wrong, tiny, delicate, and helpless. No, it couldn't be. His breathing quickened, his mind racing as the pieces started to fall into place. The woman above him scooped him up effortlessly, cradling him in her arms. He couldn't see much of her face, but her touch was kind, her movements careful as if he were the most fragile thing in the world. Her voice broke through the silence, soft and melodic. There, she cooed, rocking him gently. Such a strong little one. You're already trying to speak, Naruto froze. That voice, it wasn't Sakura. It wasn't anyone he recognized. No way. He tried to scream, but it came out as a wail. His tiny fists clenched, though the effort left him exhausted. He was so small, so weak. The woman chuckled. A warm, soothing sound. Oh, you're going to be a feisty one, aren't you? She said, brushing her fingers against his cheek. That's okay. Mama likes a little fight in her boy. Mama. Naruto's panic grew. His breaths came faster, his tiny chest heaving as the truth sank in. He was a baby. The woman, no, his mother, held him closer, her voice a steady stream of reassurances. Ricky, she said softly. Almost like she was testing the name. Ricky Gojo. A name meant for love, kindness, and strength. Doesn't that sound fitting? Nay. Naruto, no. Ricky, let out another sound, this one a soft, resigned murmur. He wasn't sure if it was a protest or an agreement. It didn't matter. The woman smiled, her silver hair falling around them like a curtain of light. I'll take that as a yes, she said, pressing a gentle kiss to his forehead. Her name, he learned in that moment, was Nico Gojo. His mother. And in her arms, he was safe. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. Nico Gojo stood in the shadows of the Gojo estate. Her fingers trembling as she clutched the edge of her sleeve. Her heart raced in anticipation, though not entirely from joy. 7 years. 7 long years of being treated as little more than an accessory. A failed accessory. At that. Infertility in a family like hers was practically a death sentence, not physically, but socially. She'd watched as her husband, Enji, the heir of the prestigious Gojo main family, treated her with indifference. Once, he might have held her hand, whispered sweet nothings, or promised her a future of grandeur. But that had all crumbled when the years passed and no child came. She became invisible. Until the pregnancy. The news had spread through the compound like wildfire. Nico, the branch family woman they'd all but dismissed, was carrying a child. Enji's child. The main family's heir was going to be a father. Suddenly, she mattered. Not as Nico, but as a vessel. Her status shifted overnight. She wasn't treated with kindness, but with a cold, begrudging respect. She wasn't Nico anymore, she was the woman carrying the future. Every meal was carefully monitored, every move scrutinized. But she bore it all with quiet strength, clinging to the hope that her child might bring her a sliver of happiness in this hollow life. And then, after 9 long months, he came. The birth was painful, exhausting, and longer than anyone expected. But when it was over, and the midwife placed the squirming bundle in her arms, Nico felt an emotion she hadn't in years. Pure, unfiltered love. He was beautiful. Snow-white hair framed his tiny face, and when his eyes fluttered open, Nico gasped. They were unlike anything she'd ever seen. Sapphire, but not just any sapphire, these glowed, shimmering like the heavens themselves. They were the 6 eyes, the mark of the strongest. The pride of the Gojo family. Before she could even hold him properly, the door to her room burst open. Hand him over. It was Enji. He didn't even glance at her. His focus was entirely on the baby. Wait, can't I? No. His voice was sharp, final. The priest is waiting. The priest. Of course. This wasn't just a child. This was an event, a prophecy waiting to be made. Ko's heart ached as the midwife reluctantly took the baby from her arms and followed Enji out of the room. She wasn't invited to the prophecy. She wasn't surprised. From her room, she could hear the murmurs of the gathered elders and the low, steady voice of the priest. She pressed her ear against the door, desperate to catch anything. Place the child on the floor, the priest said, his tone reverent. The stars will guide his fate. Nico could only imagine the scene, her tiny son lying on the cold floor, surrounded by old men calculating his worth through constellations. Yes, the priest finally said, his voice tinged with awe. I can see it clearly. He will be the strongest, the epitome of power. The scales will break under his might. His name, a pause, heavy with significance. His name should be Satoru Gojo. Nico flinched. Satoru. Not Ricky. Her heart sank. Ricky was the name she had chosen. It was her father's name, a symbol of the quiet strength she had always admired. But of course, her wishes didn't matter. Not as a branch member. Not as a woman. She could hear Enji's voice next, filled with pride. Satoru Gojo, he repeated, as if savoring the name. The child to destroy the scales. Destroy the scales. The family mantra. Power above all else. Nico felt a lump form in her throat. She knew what this meant. Her son wasn't hers anymore. He would be raised by them, shaped by their arrogance and cruelty. He would grow up to be like Enji, cold, unkind, selfish. The thought made her chest tighten. And then, a sound. Smack. It wasn't loud, just a small thud, but it sent a shiver down Nico's spine. What was that? She whispered, pressing herself harder against the door. Inside, Enji's voice was sharp, filled with barely contained fury. This disrespect. Disrespect. What had happened? Fine, Enji growled, his tone dripping with venom. If that's how it is, I grant you your first punishment. Nico's heart stopped. Punishment. For a newborn. You shall not be named Satoru, Enji continued. His voice icy. The chosen name will be stripped from you. What was the other one again? Ah, Ricky. You will be named Ricky Gojo. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a soft giggle. It was her son, Ricky Gojo. The boy who had already defied them, was giggling. Nico's lips parted in shock, and then, for the first time in years, she laughed. It was quiet, muffled by the walls, but it was real. Her son might not have been born into freedom, but in that moment, she knew one thing for sure, Ricky Gojo would never be like them. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. The Gojo clan was a mess of whispers and quiet tension. Like a hive buzzing with too much energy. Everyone had something to say about the birth of Ricky Gojo. The 6 eyes were back after generations, and nothing like that happened without shaking things up. Curses were popping up left and right, growing stronger and meaner, like the world itself had been jolted awake. The timing was no coincidence. Ricky's birth and the upcoming vessel for Master Tengen had to be connected. At least, that's what the elders kept muttering under their breath. Ricky, just a few months old, was already treated like he was some holy relic. His life was micromanaged down to the smallest detail. A squadron of maids flitted around him, catering to his every whim before he could even think of it. Milk's ready. Hurry up, he's fussing again, one maid whispered. Rushing in with a small bottle of warmed milk. Another adjusted the soft blue blanket in the crib, smoothing out wrinkles like they might offend the baby. Don't forget the scones. He likes the smell, even if he can't eat them yet. A third maid, slightly older, clicked her tongue as she gently scooped Ricky up, cradling him with the practiced ease of someone who'd been around too many Gojo babies. There, young master. No crying, Ricky blinked up at her, his wide, glowing sapphire eyes taking her in like he could see straight through her. His small hand flailed, landing awkwardly on the edge of her apron. And she chuckled nervously. He's gonna be trouble, she said under her breath. That look. He knows too much already. The others laughed quietly, but there was a tension behind it. They all knew this wasn't an ordinary baby. Meanwhile, Nico wasn't laughing. She was pacing in her quarters, running her fingers over the soft silk of her robe, her thoughts tangled with worry and frustration. She barely got to see her son. Sure, they let her feed him and hold him at night, but that wasn't enough. She wanted more. She needed more. So, she started sneaking in. Late at night, when the halls were quiet and the maids had finally settled, Nico would slip out of her room. Barefoot, she'd move silently down the cold wooden floors, her breath held like she was a thief in her own home. Ricky's nursery was always dimly lit, the soft glow of lanterns casting long shadows on the walls. She'd ease the door open, just enough to slip inside, and there he was, her baby boy. His little chest rose and fell with each tiny breath, his white hair sticking out in soft tufts. Nico would sit beside his crib, her fingers brushing lightly against his cheek. Sometimes, his eyes would flutter open. And he'd stare at her like he'd been waiting all along. "Hey, my little Ricky," she'd whisper, her voice thick with love and something heavier, fear, maybe. "Mommy's here. Don't worry." Ricky's small hand would reach for her. His fingers curling around her thumb, and she'd feel her heart twist. "You're everything to me," she'd murmur, pressing a soft kiss to his forehead. These stolen moments were all she had. But they were enough to keep her going. The clan elders didn't see any of this, though. To them, Ricky was a tool, a future weapon to maintain their legacy. They didn't care about his tiny hands reaching for his mother or the way his cries softened the moment she held him. But Ricky wasn't just some passive baby. When the maids or elders kept him away from Nico for too long, he made it known. His cries weren't the typical wails of a fussy infant. They were loud, desperate, and relentless. One afternoon, when the elders had taken him for some observation, Ricky's protests echoed through the compound. His tiny body shook with effort, tears streaming down his cheeks as he let out piercing screams. "Do something." One elder snapped, his face a mixture of annoyance and discomfort. "We've fed him. Changed him, what else does he want?" Another grumbled. "He wants his mother," one maid said quietly, earning herself a sharp glare from the elders. But the truth was undeniable. The moment Nico was allowed in, Ricky's cries stopped like a switch had been flipped. He nestled into her arms, his sobs fading into soft hiccups, and the elders couldn't ignore it. "This isn't good," one of them muttered later during a meeting. "He's too attached to her." "It's her fault," another said coldly. "She coddles him too much. It's making him weak." Nico sat in the adjacent room, holding Ricky close as he dozed off. Unaware of the conversation happening just a wall away. She stroked his soft hair, her lips pressed into a thin line as she tried to block out their words. "She's the problem," an elder declared finally. His tone icy and resolute. "We'll remove her from the equation." Nico didn't hear that part. She had already slipped out of the room, heading back to her quarters with Ricky in her arms. But if she had heard it, she might have held him a little tighter, her resolve growing stronger. Because no matter what the clan thought or did, Ricky wasn't just the clan's heir or the next wielder of the Six Eyes. He was her son, and she wasn't going to let them take him away from her, not without a fight. But Ricky heard it all. Every whispered word, every biting remark, thanks to his advanced senses. Those glowing sapphire eyes of his weren't just for show. They saw too much, caught too much. And when they couldn't see, his sharp instincts filled in the gaps. His tiny mind, once Naruto Uzumaki's, processed the conversation faster than it should have. "They're coming for her," he thought, his little fists curling against the soft blankets around him. His mother wasn't perfect, but she was his. As the night settled over the Gojo estate, everything grew still. The air had a weight to it, thick and suffocating, as if the world itself held its breath. Ricky lay quietly in his crib, his small chest rising and falling with slow, deliberate breaths. Somewhere down the hall, the elder, the one chosen for the task, moved silently through the shadows. He was old, but his body was still sharp. Every step light and deliberate. His movements made no noise as he slipped through the halls. This wasn't his first time handling an inconvenience. He was confident it wouldn't be his last. The elder paused outside the room belonging to Nico Gojo. His hand hovered over the sliding door, the needle hidden up his sleeve catching the faintest gleam of moonlight. He glanced around one last time, ensuring the coast was clear. Inside, Nico slept soundly, unaware of the looming threat. Her face was soft, peaceful, as though the weight of her worries had finally lifted for just a moment. The elder inhaled deeply, steadying himself. Quick and clean, he thought. He'd done this countless times before. A small prick, a whisper of poison in her veins, and she'd be gone before the morning. The clan would handle the rest. But as he reached for the door, his body froze. Something cold and sharp shot through his chest, like the twist of a knife. His instincts screamed at him to stop, to run, to leave the place altogether. But he didn't. He'd been through worse. He wasn't about to back down now. Shaking off the strange sensation, the elder nodded to himself. He slid the door open a crack. Cluck. He felt like a boulder was all of a sudden placed over his chest. He had just enough time to register the noise before his body jerked violently forward, his feet stumbling out from under him. Then the silence returned. The elder's lifeless body crumpled to the ground just outside the door, his face twisted in confusion. His wide, unseeing eyes didn't catch the faint glow coming from the other side of the hall. Back in his quarters, Ricky lay still, his eyes wide open, glowing faintly in the dark. His little fingers curled around the edge of his blanket, and his gaze remained fixed on the shadows outside. He didn't know how he knew, whether it was instinct or some leftover fragment of Naruto Uzumaki, but he'd sensed the danger. And he'd stopped it. The next morning, the estate was anything but peaceful. A maid's piercing scream echoed through the compound as she stumbled across the elder's body in the garden. His cold, lifeless figure was sprawled awkwardly on the dewy grass, his expression frozen in shock. The commotion spread quickly. Servants whispered to each other, their voices shaky and uncertain. What happened to him? One maid asked, peering nervously at the scene from a distance. No idea. Another muttered. But whoever did this, they didn't leave a trace. The elders were silent, their faces pale as they stared down at the body. The head of the clan stood off to the side. His lips pressed into a thin line as he assessed the situation. It's a message, he finally said, his voice low and gravelly. Whoever did this wanted us to know they were here. And they wanted us to know they can strike back. Nico, clutching Ricky close to her chest, stayed far away from the commotion. She'd heard the whispers, caught bits and pieces of the maid's panic chatter. But she didn't press for details. Ricky, for his part, nestled into her arms, his tiny fingers clutching at the fabric of her robe. His expression was calm, almost serene, as though he knew everything would be fine. Nico glanced down at him, brushing a strand of white hair from his forehead. It's okay, Ricky, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. We're okay. But she couldn't hake the feeling that something had changed. And in the back of her mind, a question lingered, how long would it stay that way? It didn't take long for the Gojo clan to realize something was different about Ricky. Babies were supposed to be simple creatures, weren't they? They cried, they ate, they slept. Repeat the cycle. But Ricky, he wasn't like that. First off, he was too perceptive for a baby his age. The six eyes didn't just make him look otherworldly, they seemed to gift him an unnatural awareness of his surroundings. If someone tried to sneak up on him, Ricky would turn his head sharply, fixing them with a glare that felt far too grown up for an infant. And that glare, oh, that glare, was terrifying. It's like he can see right through me, one maid whispered, clutching her tray of food nervously. Don't be dramatic. Another scoffed, but even she avoided meeting Ricky's piercing gaze. The boy didn't make things easy for them, either. He was impossibly choosy when it came to food, a trait that baffled everyone. Most babies would cry for milk or mashed up peas, but Ricky, he seemed to have the palate of a food critic. Here you go, little master, a maid said one day, placing a bowl of baby-friendly rice porridge in front of him. Ricky stared at it, then at her. He didn't cry. He didn't fuss. He just stared, his glowing eyes narrowing slightly. What's wrong with him? Another maid asked, peeking over the first one's shoulder. I don't know, she stammered. It's just porridge. Ricky's gaze shifted back to the bowl. He tilted his head slightly, as if weighing his options. And then gave the bowl a deliberate shove, sending it tumbling to the floor. Great, the first maid muttered, crouching to clean up the mess. Guess he's not a fan of porridge. Things got even trickier when they tried giving him something with a little more flavor, just a pinch of spice, they thought. Surely he couldn't be that picky, right? Wrong. The moment the spoonful of spiced soup touched his lips, Ricky's tiny face scrunched up in pure disgust. His cheeks puffed out, his nose wrinkled, and he spat it out with such force that it landed on the maid's apron. Oh, come on, she cried, dabbing at the stain. Ricky, for his part, glared at her like she'd personally offended him. It was becoming a pattern. Ignore his preferences, and he'd unleash the full weight of his six-eyes glare. Some of the younger maids even started avoiding his feeding times, too spooked to deal with his silent judgments. There was, however, one exception to this chaos: Nico. No matter what she brought him, Ricky would eat it without complaint. Whether it was a bottle of milk, soft slices of fruit, or even plain rice, if it came from Nico, he'd accept it with a quiet hum of approval. And of course, her own milk was a must. He's such a mama's boy, one of the elders sneered, watching from the corner as Nico fed Ricky with practiced ease. Nico didn't respond. She focused on her son, her fingers brushing his snowy white hair as he happily munched on a piece of melon. But deep down, she knew the truth. Ricky didn't trust anyone else. And given the way the clan treated her, she couldn't blame him. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. Ricky had reached that stage where crawling became his new superpower, and with that came a newfound sense of independence. For Naruto, in his past life, crawling meant sneaking away from the orphanage matrons yelling. Here, crawling meant exploring a world filled with attentive maids and soft, plush carpets. In his past life, he'd barely had anyone who cared. The orphanage had been indifferent at best, and neglectful on most days. But here he had a dozen maids who fussed over every sneeze, every whimper, and every crooked curl of his snowy hair. They followed him like an army, ready to catch him if he so much as tilted slightly to the side. At first, Ricky wasn't too fond of them. After all, they were part of that clan, the same clan that treated his new mom, Nico, like an unwanted guest in her own house. But over time, their genuine care began to wear down his resistance. Sure, they worked for the elders, but some of them clearly didn't buy into the whole Nico's unworthy nonsense. The maids grew on him. Bit by bit. The way they smiled, how they'd talk softly to him as if he could understand, how one of them always smuggled in a scone or two just to keep him happy, it all added up. The elders, though, still annoying as hell. Their constant muttering about duty and strength grated on his nerves. They'd barge in during his feeding time or interrupt a peaceful moment. With his mom just to spout some nonsense about his future as the Six Eyes heir. He ignored them, of course, but the way they treated Nico still made his blood boil. At least now, Nico was spending more time with him. After the accident involving that elder a while back, the others seemed to have backed off slightly, letting her be with Ricky more often. That elder. Ricky didn't regret it. As Naruto, he'd been a firm believer in second chances and avoiding violence unless absolutely necessary. But here, desperation had forced his hand, or rather, his eyes. That old man had been planning to take away the one person who mattered most to him in this new life. He deserved what happened to him, plain and simple. Still, Ricky didn't dwell on it too much. He had a new life now, a new purpose. And honestly, he was enjoying some of the perks. One day, during a routine bath, something caught his eye, literally. A maid was gently scrubbing his tiny arms, humming a soft tune, when Ricky caught sight of his reflection in the polished silver basin. He froze. That face. It wasn't the whiskered, messy-haired kid he'd been used to seeing in mirrors for most of his past life. This was someone else entirely. His sapphire eyes glowed faintly, catching the light in a way that made them look like miniature galaxies. They were beautiful. Was this some kind of dojutsu? And the hair, white as freshly fallen snow, soft and sleek. The maid noticed his sudden silence and paused her humming, tilting her head. Something wrong, little master. Ricky blinked, staring at his reflection, then let out a small sound, half a gurgle, half a chuckle. The maid giggled, her cheeks pinking slightly. You're a handsome one, aren't you? Another maid, folding towels nearby, glanced over and smiled. He's been staring at himself for 5 minutes. Guess he knows it too. Ricky gave a tiny smirk. It wasn't vanity, not really. He was just odd. This new body of his was something else entirely. The 6 eyes, the snowy hair, it all felt unreal. The maids exchanged amused glances as they continued bathing him, one of them playfully ruffling his damp hair. Careful, little master. Don't let it go to your head. Ricky rolled his eyes, or, well, as much as a baby could roll his eyes, and splashed some water in their direction. His newfound appearance was cool and all, but he wasn't about to let anyone tease him about it. As they finished up and wrapped him in a soft towel, Ricky leaned back against the maid's shoulder, his mind buzzing. This life was still a mystery to him, but one thing was clear: whoever this new, Ricky Gojo, was supposed to be. He had the tools to be someone extraordinary. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. Ricky hit his first birthday like a pro, and with it came the monumental milestone: walking. At just 1 year old, Iki Gojo wasn't just taking baby steps, he was strutting around like he owned the place. Which, to be fair, he kind of did. The maids, naturally, lost their minds over it. Did you see that? He took 3 steps. One of them squealed, clutching a hand to her chest like she'd just witnessed a miracle. 3. I counted 5. Another chimed in, practically bouncing on her feet. Little master is a genius. Ricky, meanwhile, stood in the middle of the room, his tiny legs wobbling slightly as he tried to figure out his next move. Walking wasn't hard, but it wasn't exactly easy either. His center of gravity was way different now. And these stubby little legs of his weren't exactly built for marathon running. Still, he managed to take a few more steps, earning another round of gasps and cheers from his ever-doting audience. Careful, little master, one maid said, rushing forward as he tilted dangerously to the side. She caught him just before he toppled over, lifting him up with a bright smile. You're going to give us all a heart attack. Ricky gave her a look, a classic Naruto, I'm fine, leave me alone. Look, but it didn't have quite the same effect coming from a chubby-cheeked toddler with glowing sapphire eyes. Nico, sitting nearby with a basket of folded clothes, couldn't help but smile. He's growing so fast, she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. Ricky turned to her at the sound of her voice. His little face lighting up. He reached out a hand, wobbling forward again until he made it to her side, plopping down onto her lap with a satisfied huff. See. He knows who he loves the most. Nico said with a teasing glance at the maids, who all pretended to pout in mock jealousy. Of course he does, one of them said, folding her arms. But we're the ones keeping him fed and clean. So we deserve at least some of his affection. Ricky ignored their banter, busying himself with the hem of Nico's sleeve. He tugged at it lightly, babbling something incoherent but clearly directed at her. What is it, Ricky? Nico asked softly, brushing a hand over his snowy hair. He didn't answer, of course, but his tiny hand reached up to touch her cheek, his sapphire eyes staring at her with an intensity that was almost unsettling for a 1-year-old. It was moments like this that reminded her just how special he was, not just to the clan, but to her. The maids eventually dispersed, leaving mother and son alone for a bit. Ricky took full advantage of the quiet, crawling up into Nico's arms and snuggling close. For all his new walking skills, he still loved being held by her more than anything else. Nico sighed, resting her chin lightly on top of his head. You're going to do amazing things someday, Ricky, she whispered. But for now, just stay my little boy a while longer, okay? Ricky didn't respond, he was already fast asleep. Walking, unfortunately, wasn't just a milestone, it was a signal. A signal to the Gojo clan that Ricky, now able to toddle around on his tiny legs, was ready for training. Naruto, or Ricky, as he was called now, had other ideas. He was sitting comfortably on a plush cushion in the living room, completely engrossed in a cooking show on the massive TV. The show was fascinating. The way the chef flipped the ingredients in the pan, the sizzling sounds of oil, the final plating of a dish that looked like pure art, it was all mesmerizing. Man, I wish I could eat that, Naruto thought. Drooling a little as he imagined biting into the perfectly grilled fish on screen. He was even trying to mimic the chef's hand movements, much to the amusement of the maids, who were hovering nearby. But peace never lasted long in the Gojo household. Enji Gojo, his bastard of a father, stormed in like he owned the place. Which, technically, he did. There you are, Enji growled. His sharp eyes narrowing at the sight of Ricky lounging like a miniature lord. You've grown enough to walk. That means you're ready for discipline. Naruto turned his head slowly, Gibby. Ing Enji one of his signature, what do you want? Glares. He didn't bother hiding his annoyance. Training. Ricky's sapphire eyes screamed. Dude, I'm one. Chill. Enji, of course, didn't pick up on the glare, or ignored it entirely. He strode forward, scooped Ricky up like a sack of potatoes, and carried him off toward the dojo. Hey, hey, hey. Ricky wanted to shout, but all that came out was an indignant little squeal. His tiny fists pounded against Enji's chest, but it was like hitting a brick wall. By the time they arrived at the dojo, Ricky's mood had gone from mildly annoyed to full-on furious. The dojo was massive, with polished wooden floors that gleamed under the sunlight streaming in from the high windows. Various weapons and training tools lined the walls, and the air smelled faintly of sweat and wood polish. Enji plopped Ricky down in the center of the room, his arms crossed as he looked down at his son. Stand, Enji commanded. Ricky blinked up at him. Seriously. 5 minutes, Enji added. His tone leaving no room for argument. Naruto, or Ricky, rather, wanted to laugh. This guy expects me to stand here like some statue for 5 straight minutes. I'm a baby, you moron. Still, he didn't want to give Enji the satisfaction of seeing him refuse. So he stood, wobbling slightly but managing to stay upright. The first minute was fine. Ricky's legs were stronger than they looked. And his balance was improving every day. But by the second minute, he started to feel it. His tiny legs began to shake, and he had to fight the urge to sit down. He glanced up at Enji, who was watching him with an expression that could only be described as smug. Hold your posture, Enji said, his voice sharp. Ricky glared at him. If looks could kill, Enji would have been 6 feet under. By the third minute, Ricky's frustration was boiling over. He wasn't just angry at Enji for putting him through this, he was angry at the whole situation. The clan's obsession with strength, the way they treated his mom like she didn't matter. The fact that they saw him as nothing more than a tool, it all made his blood boil. You're going to pay for this someday, Ricky thought, his glare intensifying. When the 5 minutes were finally up, Ricky let himself collapse onto the floor with a dramatic flop. He lay there, panting slightly, and shot Enji one last death glare for good measure. Enji, of course, remained unimpressed. You'll thank me for this someday, he said, turning to leave. Ricky rolled his eyes. Yeah, right. As soon as Enji was out of earshot, one of the maids poked her head into the dojo. Little master, she called softly. Ricky turned his head to look at her, his expression immediately softening. Oh, you poor thing, the maid cooed, rushing over to scoop him up. What was your father thinking? Making a baby stand like that? Ricky snuggled into her arms, enjoying the warmth and comfort after that ridiculous ordeal. Let's get you back to the living room, the maid said, her tone gentle. I think they're about to make dessert on that cooking show you like. Ricky perked up at that. Dessert. Now that was worth crawling back to the TV for. As the maid carried him out of the dojo, Ricky made a silent vow. One day, I'm going to make Enji regret ever messing with me. But first, dessert. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. By the time Ricky hit the ripe old age of 2, the Gojo household discovered something alarming: he could talk. Not just babbling random words or calling out, Mama, and Dada, but full-on, coherent sentences. And his first words. I'll be the strongest. It wasn't the usual, I'm hungry, or I want milk, kind of stuff you'd expect from a toddler. No, Ricky had to go for the dramatic declaration. Fortunately, his mother, Nico, was there to hear it, her face lighting up with pride. Unfortunately, Enji was passing by the room and heard it too. He froze in his tracks. His sharp ears caught every word, and his sharp brain immediately started scheming. A child who can talk perfectly, he muttered to himself, means a child who can read. And thus began Ricky's next ordeal. The very next day, Ricky found himself sitting in a spacious room filled with shelves of books and an intimidating woman staring down at him. She was tall, thin, and looked like she hadn't smiled in decades. Her sharp glasses and even sharper gaze screamed strict teacher vibes. This, she announced, holding up a book, is your first lesson. Ricky, sitting cross-legged on a cushion, tilted his head and gave her his best toddler glare. Lady, do I look like someone who's excited to learn etiquette and basic letters? But he played along, for now. He didn't plan on staying under her tutelage for long. He'd been through worse in his past life, after all. This was just another hurdle. The first few lessons were uneventful. She taught him how to hold a pen, trace basic shapes, and recognize letters. Ricky pretended to struggle at first, just to keep his reincarnation secret intact. But by the third day, he got bored. So, during one of their lessons, when she handed him a blank sheet of paper and asked him to practice writing his name, Ricky decided to have some fun. He took the pen in his tiny hand and started scribbling furiously. His tutor watched, expecting the usual clumsy lines and awkward letters. Instead, what she got was an entire essay. Sure, it was filled with spelling errors, the handwriting was messy, and half the words were barely legible. But it was unmistakably an essay. And the topic: why the Gojo clan is terrible. The tutor's jaw dropped. She grabbed the paper and began reading aloud, her voice trembling with disbelief. The Gojo clan, the Gojo clan, is full of meanie heads who only care about power and they treat people like tools and don't love anyone except themselves. She paused, blinking at the blatant lack of punctuation and the overuse of and. But the content was scathing. Their rules are dumb and they don't let moms spend time with their kids. Also, their food is bad. Except for scones. Scones are okay. By the time she finished reading, her hands were shaking. She looked down at Ricky, who was sitting there with a smug little grin on his face. Where did you learn to write this? She demanded. Ricky shrugged, leaning back on his cushion like a tiny king. I'm just smart. HMPH, he thought to himself, puffing out his chest. Reincarnation has its perks. Word of Ricky's essay spread like wildfire through the clan. Some of the elders laughed it off, calling it childish nonsense. Others were deeply offended, claiming it was a sign of disrespect. Enji, however, wasn't amused. He cornered Ricky later that day, holding the crumpled essay in his hand. Did you write this? He asked, his voice cold. Ricky looked up at him, his sapphire eyes gleaming with defiance. Yeah, you don't like it. Enji's grip on the paper tightened. Do you even understand what you've done? Ricky crossed his arms, his tiny frame somehow radiating confidence. Yeah, I told the truth. For a moment, Enji didn't know how to respond. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by a 2-year-old. I'll make sure you understand discipline, he growled, turning to leave. Ricky watched him go, rolling his eyes. This guy's the worst. He'll probably make me stand in the dojo again. Despite the drama, Nico couldn't stop smiling when she heard about the essay. She hugged Ricky tightly that night, whispering, "You're so brave, my little genius." Ricky snuggled into her arms, feeling a warmth he hadn't experienced in his past life. Sure, the Gojo clan was a nightmare. But at least he had his mom, and scones. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. Ricky was dragged to yet another Gojo clan gathering, this time to watch the adults practice hand-to-hand combat. The dojo was packed with members eager to flaunt their skills in front of the future bearer of the 6 eyes. Ricky, seated on a plush cushion with maids fanning him, yawned dramatically. The adults sparred in pairs, their movements sharp but lacking finesse. Punches flew. Kicks were thrown, but to Ricky, it was all a clumsy dance. He tilted his head, unimpressed. This is supposed to be amazing, he thought, resting his chin on his tiny fist. Bushy brows and bushier brows sensei would have fainted if they saw this mockery of taijutsu. He tried to stifle a laugh, remembering the intense training sessions with Rock Lee and Might Guy back in his past life. Their speed, precision, and dedication were unparalleled. Compared to them, these people looked like toddlers playing ninja. Still, one thing caught his attention. His father, Enji, stepped into the ring. Towering over his opponent. A younger clan member charged at him, fists flying. But before a single blow could land, something strange happened. Every strike, punches, kicks, even elbow jabs, stopped a few inches away from Enji's body, as if hitting an invisible wall. The younger man grunted in frustration, pouring more effort into his attacks, but it was useless. Enji stood there, calm and unbothered. How's he doing that? Ricky mumbled, narrowing his eyes. The elders around him began murmuring, their voices filled with reverence. It's his cursed technique, limitless. Even though it's incomplete without the 6 eyes, it's still formidable. Ricky perked up at the mention of limitless. He'd heard bits and pieces about this so-called technique, but seeing it in action was different. His sapphire eyes glowed faintly as he observed his father. The elders continued their commentary. If he had the 6 eyes, his limitless would have been perfect, allowing him to manipulate the very fabric of space. But without them, it's incomplete. He can only create basic barriers and stop objects from touching him. Ricky's interest was piqued. Wait, so I might have that too. The thought sent a shiver of excitement down his tiny spine. He had already figured out some of his abilities. Like the time he stopped that old man's heart with just a glance, though he hadn't fully understood how he did it. But this, manipulating space, that was on a whole new level. The sparring session ended, and Enji walked over to Ricky, his expression unreadable. He crouched down, leveling with his son's gaze. Did you pay attention? Enji asked. Ricky nodded, keeping his face neutral. Good, Enji said, standing up again. You'll start learning soon. Ricky didn't respond, but inside, he was buzzing with curiosity. If he truly had limitless, combined with the 6 eyes, he could do things that even his father couldn't dream of. But as he sat there, watching the adults disperse, another thought crept into his mind. What's the catch? Power always came with a cost. And knowing the Gojo clan, they wouldn't let him explore his abilities freely. They'd want control. Still, Ricky couldn't deny the thrill of it all. Limitless, huh? He mused, a small smirk tugging at his lips. Guess it's time to find out just how limitless I really am. By the time Ricky was 3, he had already mastered reading, writing, and etiquette, skills drilled into him by his strict tutors. He could write essays that, while full of clumsy mistakes, still impressed the adults with their clarity and insight. His ability to absorb information was unmatched. And his tutors often bragged about his progress to the elders. But Ricky wasn't exactly what you'd call respectful. He openly rolled his eyes at his father, Enji, and the gaggle of old geezers who always hovered around, dictating his every move. When it came to them, he didn't even bother to hide his disdain. His sharp tongue and lack of deference often left them grumbling about kids these days. Despite his prodigious talents, there was one area where Ricky was hilariously bad: maths. Initially, his tutors were impressed. A 3-year-old solving 3rd grade maths. He's a genius. That sentiment quickly turned to confusion when Ricky's mind blanked out the moment anything involved 3-digit numbers or complex operations. Critical thinking in maths seemed to short-circuit his brain. And no amount of tutoring could fix it. Why are there letters in maths? What is this? Algebra. Ricky once groaned, dramatically face planting onto his desk. His past life as Naruto Uzumaki wasn't helping either. Numbers were the bane of his existence back then, too. Multiplication tables, division, even counting money, anything beyond basic arithmetic felt like torture. And now, it seemed, some things never changed. Still, Ricky took solace in the fact that, technically, he was 3 years old solving maths meant for 8-year-olds. He could live with being a loser at maths for now. When he wasn't stuck solving equations or writing essays, Ricky indulged in his guilty pleasure, anime. The elders, as much as they annoyed him, had subscribed to DVD services to enhance his education, which conveniently included the latest releases of his favorite shows. His small room became a shrine to the hit shows: One Piece, Sailor Moon, Doraemon, Dragon Ball, you name it, he had it. There was something comforting about watching Luffy shout about friendship or Goku power up for the umpteenth time. Even in this new world, some things remained universal. One day, a maid walked in to find Ricky mimicking Usagi's iconic line from Sailor Moon, "In the name of the moon, I will punish you." His dramatic pose, complete with a makeshift wand fashioned from a chopstick, left her giggling for hours. Still, the elders weren't about to let him slack off. Ricky must improve, they said sternly. He's already behind on his combat training and his grasp of advanced techniques. Ricky could only roll his eyes, muttering, "Geez, let me enjoy One Piece in peace for once." Despite his cheeky attitude, Ricky knew he had bigger goals. He wasn't just a lazy reincarnated teen reliving his childhood. He had a mission. His mother, Nico, was his constant reminder of why he needed to get stronger. The discrimination she faced as a branch family member burned in his chest. Even as a 3-year-old, Ricky could see how the elders looked down on her, how they dismissed her opinions and treated her like she was expendable. Ricky's dream wasn't just to become the strongest. It was to change the way the Gojo clan, and the entire Jujutsu world, operated. He wanted to abolish the ridiculous hierarchy that put people like his mom at the bottom. "I'll reach the top," he muttered one night, staring out the window as the moonlight bathed his small room. "And I'll make sure no one else has to go through what mom does." For now, though, he had to deal with the tediousness of being 3. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. By the time Ricky turned 4, he had the academic prowess of a 6th grader, could speak fluent English, and his calligraphy was so good that his tutors would sometimes frame his work as examples for other students. His etiquette was polished, well, polished enough when he wasn't rolling his eyes or muttering insults under his breath, and he excelled at pretty much everything else. But what really mattered to the Gojo clan wasn't how good he was at maths or writing essays. They wanted to know what his curse technique was. One sunny afternoon, the clan's priest, a wiry man who looked as if he hadn't smiled in decades, was called in to conduct a test. Ricky was stripped down to his shorts and made to sit in a shallow tub of water in the courtyard. "What's with the tub? Am I getting baptized or something?" Ricky asked, squinting up at the priest. "Silence, child," the priest barked. A single guava was placed on a small pedestal in front of him. "You must concentrate on the fruit," the priest intoned dramatically. "Focus your energy. Let your cursed technique manifest." "Seriously. A guava?" Ricky muttered, crossing his arms. "Couldn't it have been, I don't know, a peach or something cooler?" Silence. From a distance, Enji and the elders watched intently, their expressions unreadable but their anticipation palpable. Ricky sighed. Fine. If it meant getting them off his back, he'd play along. Closing his eyes, he tried to concentrate. For 10 long minutes, he sat there in the water, his brow furrowed as he focused on the guava like his life depended on it. It didn't help the elders were whispering furiously in the background. "Do you think it's limitless? It must be. The 6 eyes wouldn't manifest without it. If it's anything less, it would be a disappointment." Ricky wanted to scream. "Could you all shut up for like 5 seconds? Just as he was about to snap, the guava wobbled. Not much, just a tiny, almost imperceptible shift, but it was enough to silence the murmurs. Everyone leaned in, holding their breaths. The guava floated. It rose an inch off the pedestal, hovering there as if suspended by invisible strings. "Ah," the priest murmured, his voice tinged with awe. "Limitless." Enji's face twitched, his usual scowl softening into something almost like a smile. The elders, meanwhile, erupted into a flurry of whispers. "Limitless. Just as we hoped. With the 6 eyes, it will be perfected. This child is truly a gift from the heavens." Ricky, however, wasn't feeling very heavenly. His head hurt from the effort, and his arms felt like they weighed a ton. "That's it. I made a fruit float. And now I'm supposed to be a genius," he muttered under his breath. Unfortunately for him, the elders weren't about to let him rest on his laurels. That very day, they pushed him to his limits, forcing him to practice until he could levitate the guava a full 3 inches off the ground. By the time they were done with him, he was so exhausted he could barely keep his eyes open. That night, as he lay sprawled on his bed, Ricky stared at the ceiling, his mind spinning. "So, I have a cursed technique now," he muttered to himself. "And it's limitless, huh?" A small smile tugged at his lips. "Not bad. Not bad at all." Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. At just 4 years old, Ricky was introduced to the basics of hand-to-hand combat. For any normal kid, this would have been a big deal, to learn fighting stances and techniques from experienced instructors. But for Ricky, he inwardly groaned. "Bruh, I was Naruto Uzumaki. One of the best taijutsu artists to ever exist. You think these basic stances are gonna impress me?" Still, he couldn't exactly tell them that. So, he played along, mimicking their movements and occasionally pretending to stumble, just to avoid raising suspicion. But when it came to actual sparring, things got weird. One of the instructors aimed a lazy punch at him, and Ricky sidestepped it with ease. Then came a kick, which he dodged again. Blow after blow came his way. And Ricky avoided them all without breaking a sweat. The room should have been filled with gasps of amazement. But nope. The instructors barely blinked, as if this was perfectly normal. Huh. Ricky thought, scratching his head. They're not even surprised. Weird flex, but okay. It wasn't until later that day that he got his answer. Enji, His ever-so-lovely father, sarcasm, called him to the study. Ricky reluctantly shuffled in, plopping onto the tatami mat opposite Enji. You're probably wondering why you're being treated the way you are, Enji started, his tone unusually serious. Yeah, no kidding, Ricky replied, crossing his arms. Enji ignored the sass. It's because of your eyes. My eyes. Ricky blinked. Yes. The 6 eyes, Enji said, leaning forward slightly. Do you know what they are? Ricky tilted his head. Magic eyes that make me special. Enji's lips twitched, probably the closest thing to a smile Ricky had ever seen from the man. The 6 eyes, Enji explained, are one of the rarest and most powerful abilities in the world. Only a few have ever been born with them, and you are the first in over 100 years. Cool story, but what did they actually do? Ricky asked, feigning ignorance. Enji sighed, rubbing his temples. The 6 eyes allow you to perceive cursed energy in ways no one else can. You can see its flow within every person, every object, every technique. That's why you were able to dodge so effortlessly earlier. You're not just seeing the physical movements of your opponents, you're seeing the cursed energy behind them, predicting their attacks before they happen. Ricky blinked. Wait, what? That's why these eyes are so important, Enji continued. They make limitless, a cursed technique most can barely use, truly unstoppable. With the 6 eyes, you'll not only master limitless, but you'll also be able to manipulate cursed energy with unparalleled precision. Ricky sat there, letting the information sink in. So that's why I can see this weird energy flowing around people, he thought. And here I was thinking this world was just extra trippy. And, Enji added, your eyes allow you to see the world with perfect clarity. Nothing escapes your vision. That's why you're being protected so carefully. The 6 eyes are more than just an ability, they're a responsibility. Ricky blinked again, this time in awe. Okay, so I basically Avenue eyes better than Sasuke's Sharingan and Neji's Byakugan combined. That's kinda badass. Do you understand now? Enji asked, his tone sharp. Ricky nodded slowly. Yeah, I get it. My eyes are op. Got it. Enji narrowed his eyes at the casual tone but didn't press further. Later that night, as Ricky stared at his reflection in the mirror, he couldn't help but grin. Glowing sapphire orbs stared back at him. Their intensity almost otherworldly. Alright, 6 eyes, he whispered to himself. Let's see what you can really do. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. Ricky had to admit, his 6 eyes were cool. Insanely cool. Seeing cursed energy, predicting movements. And even seeing through solid objects. That was next level stuff. But man, the headaches that came with it. Not so fun. The constant flood of data his brain had to process was like a never-ending math equation running in the background of his mind. And Ricky hated math. One day, while testing his limits, he discovered something interesting. By focusing just right, he could see through physical matter. Walls, furniture, even the ground, it all became semi-transparent, with the world of cursed energy laid bare. Whoa, he muttered, staring through the dojo wall at a maid sneaking an extra pastry from the kitchen. That's so cool. But then the headache hit, sharp and relentless, like a jackhammer inside his skull. He winced, immediately shutting his eyes. To his surprise, the world didn't go dark. He could still see, though the overwhelming detail was gone. It was normal. Awesome, he whispered, smiling despite the throbbing in his head. The next day, Iki decided to test his new, eyes closed, mode. With his lids firmly shut, he went about his usual routine, much to the maids' confusion and amusement. Young master, one of them said, suppressing a giggle, why are your eyes closed? Did you lose a bet? Nope, Ricky replied, a smirk tugging at his lips. Just trying something new. He managed to walk to the garden without tripping, pour himself a cup of tea without spilling. And even dodge a stray ball that rolled his way. The maids exchanged glances, their giggles growing louder. You look ridiculous, young master. One teased. Ridiculously cool, Ricky shot back. Striking a pose. They laughed, and even Ricky couldn't help but grin. His mother, Nico, wasn't as amused. When she found him wandering around with his eyes closed, she crossed her arms and gave him the look. Ricky, she said, her tone gentle but firm, walking like that is dangerous. What if you fall or bump into something? But mom, Ricky whined, rubbing his temples, the headaches are brutal. And this helps. Nico's expression softened. She knelt down, brushing a strand of white hair from his face. I see. You're pushing yourself too hard, aren't you? Ricky shrugged, trying to play it cool. But the tired look in his eyes betrayed him. That evening, Nico disappeared into her sewing room. Ricky didn't think much of it until she returned hours later, holding something in her hands. Here, she said, kneeling beside him. It was a blindfold, a deep, royal purple silk that shimmered faintly in the light. The edges were stitched with silver thread, forming intricate patterns that almost looked like flowing energy. For me? Ricky asked, his voice soft. Nico smiled. It'll help with the headaches, and it's much safer than walking around with your eyes closed. She tied it gently around his head. The silk cool and smooth against his skin. It muffled the intensity of his vision just enough to ease the strain, while still letting him see in his own unique way. How does it feel? Nico asked, brushing her fingers against his cheek. Perfect, Ricky said, grinning. He stood up, striking a dramatic pose with the blindfold in place. I look like a badass now, don't I? Nico laughed, her heart full as she watched her son. You've always been a badass, Ricky. And just like that, the headaches became a little more bearable, and Ricky gained a new signature look. One that screamed, yeah, I'm cool. Deal with it. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. At 6 years old, Ricky Gojo was already miles ahead of the average kid, or even most adults, for that matter. His linguistic skills were sharp. He hold a decent conversation in Spanish, fluently chat in English, and even make sarcastic quips in Chinese. His math skills. Insane. While most 6-year-olds were learning to count apples, Ricky was solving calculus problems like they were puzzles in a kid's magazine. But his real claim to fame was his limitless. The maids loved to boast about how their young master could levitate objects with ease. From apples to entire chairs. Ricky treated telekinesis like a casual hobby. He'd even begun to experiment with levitating himself, floating a few feet off the ground while reading a book or snacking on some biscuits. One memorable afternoon, the elders decided to test him further. The open field was dotted with softballs, each aimed directly at Ricky. He stood at the center, blindfolded as always, hands in his pockets. Looking utterly unimpressed. Begin, barked one elder. The balls came flying from all directions, a flurry of projectiles meant to overwhelm him. Ricky sighed, casually lifting a hand. The air around him shimmered faintly, and the balls froze mid-air, suspended in an invisible field of cursed energy. With a flick of his wrist, he sent them hurtling back toward the elders. One unfortunate man yelped, narrowly dodging a softball that whizzed past his ear. The others stared, mouths agape. Ricky smirked beneath his blindfold. This is boring. Got anything harder? The elders were both impressed and irritated. Despite his obvious genius, Ricky's mother, Nico, was his biggest fan. She didn't care about his academic achievements or his curse technique. She cared that he was still her sweet, cheeky little boy who occasionally sneaked cookies into her room and made her laugh with his exaggerated impressions of the elders. She was also relieved, so relieved, that she hadn't been removed from the equation. Every time she saw Ricky, her heart swelled with pride and love. Then, one night, everything changed. The clan head, an old, stubborn man who had held the Gojo family in an iron grip for decades, suffered a sudden stroke. Despite the best efforts of the family's healers, he passed away in his sleep. The news spread like wildfire. Mourning rituals began immediately. But it didn't take long for the political gears to start turning. Enji, Ricky's father, was next in line for leadership. By sunrise, he had assumed the role of clan head. Ricky, however, wasn't thrilled. So, he muttered to his mother over breakfast the next morning, does this mean dad's gonna get even bossier? Nico chuckled softly, ruffling his hair. He's not that bad, Ricky. Ricky rolled his eyes. Yeah, sure. Tell that to my bruised ribs from all the training sessions. Despite his sarcasm, Ricky couldn't deny that his father's rise to power brought new challenges and opportunities. He had a feeling things were about to get a lot more complicated. But hey, he was Ricky Gojo. Complicated was practically his middle name. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. It was a picturesque morning, the kind where the sun bathed everything in golden hues and a cool breeze made even the elders in the Gojo household seem less grumpy. Ricky sat cross-legged on the porch, absent-mindedly twirling a twig between his fingers, while his mother, Nico, poured tea into delicate porcelain cups. Then, without warning, Enji spoke. Ricky, what's your dream? The question caught both of them off guard. Nico froze mid-pour, her brow furrowing slightly as she glanced at her son. It wasn't often that Enji, a man who believed actions spoke louder than words, initiated deep conversations. Ricky, unbothered, leaned back against the wooden pill. Lauren gave his father a thoughtful look. I want to create balance in the jujutsu world, he said, his tone unusually serious for a boy his age. And end discrimination. For a moment, silence reigned. Enji's expression remained unreadable, though there was a flicker of something in his eyes, approval. Skepticism. Maybe both. He gave a curt nod and left without another word. Nico exhaled softly, placing the teapot down. You're going to give your father a heart attack one day, she said with a small smile. Ricky shrugged, smirking. If the old man can't handle my ambitions, maybe he should consider early retirement. That afternoon, Ricky was introduced to a world far darker than his cushioned life in the Gojo estate, cursed spirits. Of course he knew about them. But this was his first official lesson about them. His teacher was a stern, bespectacled woman with snow-white hair and a no-nonsense attitude. She carried herself with the kind of authority that even the elders didn't question. Her lessons were blunt, filled with detailed explanations and no room for childish antics. She was the same one who had taught him how to read and write. Cursed spirits, she began, adjusting her glasses, are manifestations of negative human emotions, fear, hatred, grief, and more. The stronger the emotions, the more powerful the spirit. She paused, fixing Ricky with a sharp gaze. Do you understand? Ricky nodded. But she continued anyway, listing their classifications. Fourth grade cursed spirits are weak, little more than nuisances. Third and second grades can pose threats to untrained sorcerers, but they're manageable. First grade and special grade, however, she trailed off, letting the weight of her words hang in the air. They're monsters. Some are capable of obliterating entire towns. She then brought up a name that sent a chill down Ricky's spine, Ryomen Sukuna. Sukuna, she said, her tone grim, was once a human sorcerer, but his overwhelming power and cruelty transformed him into the king of curses. Even in death, his presence lingers. His 20 fingers, preserved as cursed objects, are so potent that consuming even one can turn a person into a vessel for his resurrection. Ricky's eyes widened beneath his blindfold. A human so powerful they became a cursed spirit even after death. That's insane. Later that day, Enji took Ricky down to the dungeon, a dark, foreboding space beneath the estate where captured cursed spirits were kept in cages. The air was thick with malice, making Ricky's skin crawl. This, Enji said, gesturing to a grotesque, writhing mass in a nearby cage. Is a fourth-grade cursed spirit. Weak, but still dangerous to civilians. Before Ricky could respond, Enji raised a hand, his cursed energy flaring. With a single, precise strike, he obliterated the spirit, leaving nothing but a faint residue of energy in its place. That's how strong you need to be, Enji said, turning to face his son. His voice was calm but carried an edge. The day you can face an army of special-grade cursed spirits alone, I'll hand you this clan. Until then, you're just another kid with potential. Ricky's lips curled into a wide grin. He felt the challenge ignite something deep within him, a fire that refused to be extinguished. Plan your early retirement, old man. He declared, his voice brimming with confidence. Enji smirked faintly, the closest thing to approval he'd ever show. We'll see. As they left the dungeon, Ricky couldn't help but feel exhilarated. The road ahead was daunting, but he was ready. After all, he wasn't just Ricky Gojo, he was a reincarnated Naruto Uzumaki. And if there was one thing he excelled at, it was defying the odds. The year was 2004, and life in the Gojo estate was relatively quiet. Ricky sat cross-legged on the tatami mat in his room. A faint grin tugging at his lips as he tore open the packaging of a new manga his mother had bought for him. The vibrant orange cover immediately caught his eye, but it was the title that froze him in place. Naruto. The name hit him like a punch to the gut. He blinked once, twice, trying to convince himself that he'd misread it. But no, the bold kanji remained the same. Undern. The title was the name of the creator, Masashi Kishimoto. Ricky's heart raced as he opened the manga. His fingers trembled slightly, and the sound of rustling pages filled the room as he began to read. Within moments, his eyes widened behind his blindfold. What the actual fuck? He muttered under his breath. The story wasn't just familiar, it was exactly his life. Every detail, down to the smallest interaction, was identical. The first volume chronicled everything leading up to the day before his graduation as a shinobi, the confrontation with Mizuki, the theft of the Forbidden Scroll, Ruruka-sensei's unwavering support, and the formation of Team 7. He finished the volume in record time and immediately flipped back to the beginning. He read it again, and again, and again, until his brain felt like it was going to short-circuit. How is this possible? Ricky leaned back against the wall, his breathing shallow. The memories from his past life as Naruto Uzumaki came flooding back, now mingling with a growing sense of unease. This wasn't some coincidence. This wasn't some random work of fiction that happened to align with his life. This was his life. And then the bigger question hit him like a ton of bricks. Who the hell is Masashi Kishimoto? His gaze darted toward the bottom of the cover, where a short bio of the creator was printed. It didn't say much, just that Kishimoto was a mangaka who loved creating stories and had been working on Naruto for a while. Bullshit, Ricky muttered. There was no way someone could have written this without knowing everything about him. But how? And more importantly, why? He slammed the manga shut and paced around his room, his thoughts spiraling. This doesn't make any sense. Did someone spy on me during my past life? Is this some kind of curse technique? Or, his mind paused on a chilling possibility. What if this is a warning? The sound of soft footsteps snapped him out of his thoughts. His mother, Nico, peeked into his room, her usual gentle smile on her face. Ricky, are you alright? You've been quiet for a while. Ricky quickly shoved the manga under a cushion. Yeah, Mom. Just, thinking about some training stuff. Nico raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. Alright. Dinner will be ready soon. As soon as she left, Ricky pulled the manga out again and stared at the cover. The cheerful depiction of his past self grinned back at him. Utterly oblivious to the storm brewing in Ricky's mind. Whoever you are, Masashi Kishimoto, Ricky thought, his jaw tightening, you and I need to have a talk. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. At 7, Ricky was finally granted the privilege of choosing his own attire, an occasion the entire Gojo clan seemed to take far too seriously. The elders assembled in their usual stern silence, the maids whispered bets on his decision, and even his father, Enji, watched from a distance with mild curiosity. The options laid before him were simple. Traditional yukata, the timeless attire of their clan, steeped in elegance and history. Modern Western clothing, tailored suits and casual styles that spoke of progress and prestige. But Ricky had other ideas. As he stood in front of the panel tasked with approving his choice, his blindfolded gaze seemed to gleam with mischief. Everyone braced themselves, expecting something completely outlandish. After all, this was Ricky, the child prodigy who loved to subvert expectations. He began. Pausing dramatically, a mix. The room collectively leaned forward, waiting for the punchline. A white coat, he announced, royal purple lining, with a high collar. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. That wasn't too bad. A plain white t-shirt underneath, he continued. Reasonable, practical. Black pants, Ricky added, his voice steady. Simple, elegant. And shinobi sandals. The room fell silent. What? One of the elders blurted out, breaking their stoic facade. You heard me, Ricky said, a smirk tugging at his lips. Shinobi sandals. Like in the manga. Ga. SPS and whispers filled the room as everyone tried to process the audacity of his choice. The maids giggled behind their hands, while Enji pinched the bridge of his nose in exasperation. You mean, the ones from that Naruto book you're always reading? Another elder asked, barely concealing their disdain. Exactly, Ricky said, his grin widening. You do realize this is not a joke, Ricky, Enji said, his tone sharp. This is about representing the Gojo clan with dignity. And I'll look dignified, Ricky shot back. I'll also look badass. You're welcome. Despite the uproar, Ricky's request was approved. A week later, his new outfit was tailored to perfection, and when he finally put it on, even his harshest critics had to admit that he pulled it off. The white coat, with its royal purple accents, gave him an air of regality. The plain white t-shirt and black pants balanced it with simplicity, and the shinobi sandals, while unconventional, added a touch of flair that only Ricky could make work. As he stood in front of the mirror, admiring his reflection, he couldn't help but grin. Badass, he said to himself, striking a casual pose. Nico walked in at that moment, her soft laughter filling the room. You certainly know how to make a statement, Ricky. I know, he said, turning to face her. Mom, be honest. Don't I look like the coolest guy in the clan? Nico smiled, brushing a stray lock of his white hair out of his face. You look like yourself, Ricky. And that's more than enough. He grinned wider. Exactly. From that day forward, Ricky's new attire became his signature look, a perfect blend of his two lives. Every time he looked at his shinobi sandals, he was reminded of his past as Naruto Uzumaki and his determination to leave an even greater mark in this new world. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. Kaori Itadori was a woman with a plan. And her plans were as meticulous as they were ruthless. The report in her hand trembled slightly as she reread the details. Ricky Gojo, age 7. 6 eyes with limitless. A prodigy among prodigies. A boy who could shatter the delicate equilibrium she was striving so hard to maintain. She clicked her tongue in irritation, her sharp mind already churning through contingencies. Ricky's rapid growth wasn't just troublesome, it was catastrophic. If left unchecked, he would become the ultimate roadblock to her grand vision. As Kaori mulled over her predicament, sound of footsteps interrupted her thoughts. Kaori-chan tilde. Her pink-haired boyfriend's cheerful voice broke through her dark musings. Jin Itadori strolled into the room, holding 2 ice cream cones. With a grin that could light up a funeral. Guess who brought dessert? Kaori masked her irritation with a smile. Maybe I did miss you. Jin pouted dramatically. Maybe. That's cold, Kaori-chan. Her smirk widened. He was adorable, yes. But he was also something far more valuable, a wildcard. She had underestimated him before, but the latent power within him was undeniable. Who better to challenge Ricky Gojo than someone tied to the legend of Ryomen Sukuna himself? Her gaze sharpened as an idea began to take shape. Itadori-kun, she said, her voice suddenly soft, almost vulnerable. She stepped closer, taking his hands in hers. Jin blinked, caught off guard by the sudden shift in her demeanor. Yeah. Kaori's lips curved into a sweet, disarming smile. I love you. Jin's face turned redder than his hair. What? And Kaori continued, ignoring his flustered stammering, I think it's time we made things official. Would you marry me? Jin froze, his mind grinding to a halt. Wait, you're proposing to me right now. Kaori's smile didn't waver. Yes. But, shouldn't I be the one proposing? Jin scratched the back of his neck, laughing nervously. Isn't that, like, tradition or something? Kaori leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. Do you love me, Jin? Of course. He blurted out, his sincerity shining through his confusion. Then what's the problem? Jin's heart raced as he stared into her eyes. And before he could overthink it, he nodded. Okay. Let's do it. Let's get married. Kaori's smile widened, a spark of triumph flashing in her eyes. Perfect. Jin basked in the glow of their unexpected engagement. Kaori's mind was already racing ahead. With Jin under her influence, she could begin shaping him into the ultimate weapon. His connection to Sukuna was her ace. And with the right push, he would surpass even Ricky Gojo. Her plan wasn't just about neutralizing a threat anymore. It was about creating a force so unstoppable that not even the Clan's strongest prodigy could stand against it. Kaori Itadori's lips curled into a sly grin as she imagined the future. Let the game begin. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. The day Ricky stepped beyond the Gojo compound was monumental. At 8 years old, it was his first taste of true freedom, or as free as you could get with a battalion of maids and guards tailing you like you were some sort of tiny emperor. Still, it was something. And he wasn't going to complain. Much. As soon as the gates opened, Ricky's eyes sparkled. The world outside wasn't like the cold, imposing halls of the Gojo estate. It was warm, alive, and teeming with colors. Rolling green hills stretched far and wide, dotted with rice paddies and vegetable fields. Farmers worked diligently, their weathered faces turning toward him with smiles and respectful nods. Good morning, young master. They called out. Morning. Ricky waved back enthusiastically, though he couldn't help but cringe at the title. Young Master. Really? He was Naruto Uzumaki in his past life, for crying out loud. The idea of being called something so pretentious made him itch. The village itself was picturesque, like something straight out of a historical drama. Wooden houses with tiled roofs lined the dirt roads, and the scent of fresh produce wafted from market stalls. The roads bustled with activity, villagers chatting and bartering over everything from fish to handmade pottery. Ricky's first stop was the market. His entourage tried to guide him toward pre-approved vendors, but he slipped away, darting through the crowd with surprising agility for someone constantly under surveillance. He was drawn to a stand selling skewers of grilled meat. The smell was irresistible. "Oi, kid," the vendor said, grinning. "You wanna try one?" Before Ricky could respond, one of the maids stepped in. Her face like thunder. "Absolutely not. The young master doesn't eat street food." "Why not?" Ricky shot back, pouting. "I'm starving, and it smells amazing." The maid hesitated, torn between her duty and the look of pure determination on his face. With a sigh of defeat, she handed the vendor a wad of cash. Ricky grinned triumphantly as he bit into the skewer. It was heavenly, perfectly seasoned, juicy, and smoky. "This is the best thing I've ever eaten," he declared, earning a chuckle from the vendor. As he wandered further, he stumbled upon a group of kids playing tag in an open field. They paused when they saw him, their laughter dying down as they stared. Ricky approached, a friendly smile on his face, but when he ruffled one boy's hair like he was some adorable puppy, the kid glared and backed away. Sorry. Ricky mumbled, realizing he might have overdone the whole big brother act. The kids quickly resumed their game, avoiding him like he was a leper. Ricky shrugged and moved on. Their loss. The rest of the village was fascinating. There was a small shrine nestled under a massive cherry blossom tree, its petals scattering in the breeze. A craftsman demonstrated how to weave bamboo baskets, while another carved intricate designs into wooden statues. What truly amazed Ricky, though, was the blend of modern and traditional. Hidden among the old wooden buildings were hints of the 21st century, solar panels on rooftops, vending machines humming softly in the shade, and even a small convenience store with neon signs advertising the latest snacks and manga. Ricky's eyes sparkled when he spotted a familiar orange cover in the manga section, the latest volume of Naruto. He snatched it up, ignoring the maid's protests, and added it to his growing collection. As the day wore on, Ricky found himself climbing a small hill overlooking the village. The view was breathtaking. The fields stretched out like a patchwork quilt, the river shimmered like molten silver. And the mountains loomed majestically in the distance. "This place is awesome," he muttered to himself, a rare moment of peace washing over him. But even as he admired the beauty around him, a part of him itched to see more. This was just a village. What was the town like? The city? The world beyond the Gojo name? Ricky grinned, his mind racing with possibilities. Today was just the beginning. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. The news of the Zenin clan's impending visit swept through the Gojo compound like wildfire. Ricky, who had been lounging in the courtyard reading the latest volume of Naruto, perked up when he overheard two maids gossiping about it. "Why are they coming here again?" Ricky asked, flipping a page but clearly paying attention. "To see you, young master," one maid replied. Ricky froze mid-page. "Me? Yes, young master. They don't believe a Six Eyes user has been born," the other maid chimed in, looking a little too gleeful at the prospect of impending drama. Ricky groaned and shut the manga with a dramatic flair. "Of course. They don't. What's next? They think I'm a computer-generated hoax. Sheesh." Enji later explained the gravity of the situation over tea. The Zenin clan and the Gojo clan had been rivals for centuries. A rivalry born of both jealousy and genuine hatred. The Gojo clan boasted the coveted Six Eyes and Limitless technique, while the Zenin clan wielded the Ten Shadows technique. A formidable power in its own right. The tension between the two clans wasn't just rooted in bloodlines but in history. Centuries ago, a Six Eyes user fought a Ten Shadows user in a battle. So destructive it nearly leveled Kyoto, Enji said, his tone grim. Neither walked away from that fight. That hatred has simmered ever since. And the Kamo clan? Ricky asked, more out of curiosity than genuine interest. They're powerful but have lost influence, Enji said, his face hardening. A disgrace from their past weakened them, Noritoshi Kamo, a century ago. He brought shame upon their name. Ricky leaned back in his chair, processing the information. So, what's the plan? They come here, gawk at me, and then what? Tea and biscuits. Enji's lips twitched in a barely suppressed smile. Not quite. They'll be testing you. Testing me. Ricky raised an eyebrow. You're the youngest Six Eyes user in history. They'll want proof you're not just a title. Ah, Ricky groaned, rubbing his temples. Why can't I just show them a cool party trick and call it a day? Enji's expression darkened. The Zenin clan isn't here for party tricks, Ricky. They want to assess your potential, and they'll push you to see your limits. Fine, Ricky said, rolling his eyes. Let them come. I'll dazzle them with my brilliance. Or blind them with my sheer awesomeness. Either works. The day of the visit arrived. And the Gojo compound was a flurry of activity. Maids scrubbed every surface until it gleamed, and guards stood at attention, their faces grim. Ricky was dressed in a delicate white kimono adorned with blue flower patterns, exuding an air of serene elegance that belied his mischievous nature. The Zenin clan entered through the grand gates of the Gojo compound, their presence marked by an air of stoic confidence and simmering tension. Instinctively, Ricky's six eyes activated, gauging the cursed energy of the visitors with pinpoint precision. It didn't take long for him to come to a startling realization: none of them were stronger than him. Really? He thought, suppressing a smirk. I'm just an 8-year-old kid, and they can't even top that. The head of the Zenin clan, Naobito Zenin, a stern old man with a well-kept mustache and sharp, calculating eyes, stepped forward. His presence was commanding, but Ricky's glowing sapphire eyes met his gaze without a flicker of intimidation. Naobito's gaze lingered on Ricky for a moment before he finally spoke, his voice deep and probing. What's your name, boy? Ricky Gojo, Ricky replied, his tone calm but firm. Naobito raised a hand imbued with cursed energy, the air around it shimmering faintly. Tell me, what do you see? Ricky's eyes narrowed as he focused on the display of energy. He explained in precise detail, breaking down the flow, density, and technique with a level of insight that left the onlookers visibly impressed. Impressive, Naobito muttered, though his expression remained unreadable. And then, without warning, Naobito's fist, charged with cursed energy, shot toward Ricky at blinding speed. The suddenness of the attack caught everyone off guard, except for Ricky. He didn't even flinch. Slash. Something heavy hit the ground with a dull thud. All eyes turned to see Naobito's severed hand lying on the polished stone floor, blood pooling around it. Naobito didn't even glance at his lost limb. Instead, he grinned at Ricky, his eyes gleaming with approval. You're fine. With that, the man turned and walked away, his clan following closely behind. A Zenin servant dutifully picked up the severed hand and hurried after them. As if this were just another Tuesday in the world of Jujutsu sorcerers. Later that afternoon, Ricky was strolling through the village beside his mother, Nico. The peaceful hum of Dale. Life surrounded them as villagers went about their routines, bowing respectfully as the two passed. But then, Ricky felt it, a presence behind him, faint but deliberate. He stopped in his tracks and turned, his sapphire eyes scanning the area. A muscular man with black hair, wearing a dark yukata, stood a few yards away. A faint scar ran across the corner of his lips, giving him a rugged, dangerous look. He had zero cursed energy. The man stared at Ricky, his frown deepening as if in thought. Ricky narrowed his eyes, his mind racing. Who is this guy? Why is he watching me? And then, in the blink of an eye, the man was gone. Ricky. What's wrong? Nico's voice broke through his thoughts. Nothing, Mom, Ricky said, shaking his head as he turned back to her. But his mind lingered on the mysterious man and the unsettling feeling he left behind. Something told Ricky this wasn't the last time their paths would cross. Ricky bounced excitedly in his seat as the sleek, black Mercedes pulled into the neon-drenched streets of Tokyo. His signature purple hoodie hung loose over his small frame, paired with sneakers and black three-quarter pants. Every fiber of his being buzzed with energy. He was finally here, Tokyo. The city of skyscrapers, anime, and non-stop life. It was everything he'd dreamed of and more. The flashing advertisements, the chaotic buzz of pedestrians and cars, the towering buildings that scraped the sky, it was like stepping into a manga panel brought to life. But the first half of the day turned out to be a nightmare. The Mercedes dropped them off at a high-rise office building. And Enji immediately dragged him into an endless loop of business meetings. The conference rooms were bland, the air smelled faintly of coffee, and the adults droned on about strategic alliances and cursed energy management. Ricky tried to listen, really, but his mind wandered after the first 10 minutes. By the second meeting, he was doodling small figures in his notebook, sketching Y caricatures of Enji with exaggerated muscles and an oversized head. By the third meeting, he was slouched so far in his chair he was almost horizontal, silently praying for something, anything, to happen. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Enji glanced at him with a small smirk. Hina, take Ricky and show him around the city. I'll handle the rest here. Ricky shot up from his chair like a coiled spring, nearly knocking over the teacup in front of him. Yes. Hina, his ever-reliable maid and part-time bodyguard, smiled fondly. A first-grade sorcerer known for her discipline, she had a soft spot for Ricky, indulging him more than anyone else. Come on, young master. Let's make the most of the day. The moment they hit the streets, Ricky was a blur of motion, dragging Hina from one iconic spot to the next like a hyperactive tour guide. First stop, Akihabara. The electronic paradise was a sensory overload. Every corner seemed to glow with LED signs, advertising everything from cutting-edge gadgets to obscure anime merch. Ricky's eyes sparkled as they passed shop windows lined with action figures and posters. He paused to admire a figurine of a swordsman mid-swing, grinning at the craftsmanship. Though he let out a dramatic sigh when he realized there was no Naruto merchandise. Clearly, they don't know good taste yet, he muttered. From Akihabara, they made their way to the historic Asakusa district. The Shinsoji temple stood tall, its vermilion gates and towering pagoda a stark contrast to the modernity surrounding it. Ricky lit a stick of incense, clasping his hands together in prayer. Hina raised an eyebrow when she overheard his quiet muttering, "May the balance of the worlds remain intact, and may ramen always taste this good." Their next stop was the iconic Tokyo Tower. Standing at its base, Ricky tilted his head back, marveling at the sheer height of the structure. He was already calculating how far he'd need to jump with cursed energy to reach the top when Hina swiftly intervened. Young master. No. Ah, come on. Just one little leap. No. Instead, they rode the elevator to the observation deck, where Ricky pressed his face against the glass like a child, gazing at the sprawling city below. But it was in Shibuya that his day took a curious turn. As they strolled through the bustling district, Ricky's sharp eyes caught a familiar logo on a building, Shonen Jump. His heart skipped a beat. That was where Naruto was being published. He stared at the building, his thoughts swirling. One day, he whispered, gripping the straps of his backpack tightly. One day, I'm going to find out how that guy knows about my past life. Time was running short, but Hina indulged him with a final stroll along the crowded footpaths of Shibuya. The streets were alive with color and noise. Vendors shouting, tourists snapping photos, and the faint hum of a street performer's guitar. Ricky walked casually, his hands tucked into his hoodie pockets. But then, he froze mid-step. Is something wrong, young master? Hina asked, her tone laced with concern. Ricky didn't respond immediately. His sharp, glowing sapphire eyes flicked to the reflection in a cafe window. Then, with deliberate precision, he scanned the rooftop of a nearby building. Two distinct presences. They weren't openly hostile, but their cursed energy was unmistakable, thick, suffocating, and coiled tight like a spring ready to snap. Ricky's expression hardened, his 6 eyes cutting through the layers of cursed energy with surgical precision. Nothing, he finally said, his tone flat. He resumed walking, his posture casual. But his senses remained sharp. Let's go. Hina frowned, sensing his tension, but chose to trust his judgment. Unbeknownst to her, the two cursed energy users were left reeling. On the rooftop, an old woman crouched low, her breath ragged and her hand clutching her chest. The overwhelming pressure of Ricky's gaze had frozen her in place. So young, and yet, such power, she thought, trembling. In the cafe, an old man sat at a corner table, his trembling hands barely able to lift his coffee cup. Beads of sweat rolled down his temple as he muttered under his breath. That stare, 6 eyes. Neither dared to move. The weight of his gaze lingered long after he was gone, a silent warning from a boy who was far more dangerous than his age suggested. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. The sun was dipping low on the horizon as Ricky and Hina walked through the bustling streets of Shibuya, the golden glow of the city lights beginning to reflect off glass skyscrapers. The energy of the place was electric, but amidst the buzz of life, Ricky felt a shift, like a needle in his mind suddenly pointing toward a hidden menace. The cursed energy hit him like a wave, thick and suffocating, emanating from a decrepit building down a dead alley. It wasn't just strong, it was malevolent. Interesting, Ricky muttered, a small smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. Young master, no. Hina's tone was sharp, her eyes narrowing as she caught on to his intent. We don't know what's in there. Let's leave it to the professionals. I am a professional, Ricky countered, already heading toward the building. Hina groaned but relented, her protective instincts kicking in. She followed him, her hand hovering near her belt, where a small dagger gleamed faintly under the streetlights. The building was an old post office. Long abandoned and forgotten. Its exterior was cloaked in shadows, the windows shattered and boarded up. A faded sign, barely legible, still read, Shibuya's Central Post. Vines snaked up its crumbling walls. And the faint stench of mildew and decay wafted through the cracked doors. Inside, the air was heavy, oppressive. Broken desks, rusted mail carts, and piles of soggy letters littered the floor. Cobwebs hung from every corner, glistening faintly in the dim light filtering through the broken windows. The faint hum of cursed energy buzzed like static in Ricky's ears. Hina was on high alert. Her eyes scanning every shadow as smaller curses began to materialize, drawn to the lingering negativity in the building. They were grotesque creatures, their forms ranging from tiny, scuttly things with too many limbs to bloated, oozing monstrosities. Stay close, young master, Hina said firmly, stepping in front of him. Ricky didn't need to do anything. Hina moved like a dancer, her blade slicing cleanly through curses as they lunged at her. One swing, two swings, each movement precise, efficient, and deadly. She didn't waste an ounce of energy, cutting down the curses like weeds. Ricky couldn't help but grin. You're good. Really good. So, what do you do when you're not playing the perfect maid? Hunting curses. And karaoke with friends, she replied without missing a beat, skewering a leaping curse midair. Cool. Ricky said, genuinely impressed. By the time they reached the second floor, the smaller curses were still coming, though fewer in number. The air felt heavier, more oppressive. As if the building itself was alive and watching them. The third floor was eerily quiet. Dust hung thick in the air, and the only sound was the crunch of debris under their feet. Broken furniture was scattered everywhere, splintered chairs, overturned desks, and shattered filing cabinets. The walls were cracked, with graffiti scrawled in dark, almost ritualistic patterns. Ricky squinted, his 6 eyes cutting through the gloom. Something was wrong. Looks empty, Hina said, though her voice was cautious. It's not, Ricky murmured, his gaze locked on a closet shoved into the far corner of the room. It looked ordinary enough, but the cursed energy leaking from it was anything but. With a flick of his fingers, the closet burst open. A low, guttural growl echoed through the room. From the splintered remains of the closet emerged a creature that barely resembled anything human. Its grotesque, warped body was shaped like a mailbox, long and narrow, its surface rusted and pockmarked. Its head was a slot. Jagged teeth lining the edges, and its spindly arms ended in claw-like appendages. The curse cocked its unnatural head, its movements jerky and unsettling, like a puppet with its strings cut. Ricky's gaze narrowed. Young master. Hina's voice rang out, sharp and panicked. That's a special grade cursed spirit. But it was too late. The curse moved faster than either of them expected. Its claw-like arms stretching out, already aimed directly for Ricky. The curse's claw stopped just inches from Ricky's face, suspended in midair, vibrating with futile energy as if struggling against an invisible barrier. Ricky's infinity had activated just in time, creating a space where nothing could reach him. The cursed spirit thrashed, its grotesque form leaking cursed energy so potent that even Hina, a seasoned first-grade sorcerer, Winston clutched her stomach. Damn it, Ricky muttered, his forehead beating with sweat as the oppressive energy pressed against his 6 eyes like a vice. This thing's a pain. The curse suddenly retracted its claw, leaping back with unnatural agility. Its jagged, rusted head tilted forward, and from its slot-like mouth, sharp papers shot out in a rapid volley. The papers gleamed ominously, cutting through the air with deadly precision, sharper than any blade. Stay back! Ricky shouted as Hina moved to intercept. With a flick of his wrist, the space around him distorted. His limitless activated, warping the trajectory of the papers away from them. Ricky vanished in an instant, reappearing directly behind the curse. His glowing sapphire eyes locked onto its twisted form as his foot swung forward, imbued with cursed energy. The kick connected with the back of the curse's head, sending it hurtling through the wall of the post office with a deafening crash. Stay put! Hina! Ricky yelled, leaping through the shattered window. The curse tumbled into the alley below, landing with a sickening thud before unfurling sharp, paper-like wings. It hovered in the air, its grotesque form framed by the neon glow of Shibuya. Ricky floated above it, his hair and hoodie rippling in the wind as his eyes glimmered like twin beacons in the dark. The curse was fast, faster than Ricky anticipated. It darted around him, launching sharp paper projectiles in intricate patterns, trying to find a weak spot in his defense. Ricky countered each attack with precision, warping the space around him to deflect the incoming blades. Annoying little pest, Ricky muttered. The curse was smart, constantly adapting its strategy. Its cursed energy felt endless, its attacks relentless. Ricky's infinity ensured he wouldn't be harmed, but without a technique strong enough to destroy the curse, he was stuck in a stalemate. That was, unless. Ricky clenched his fist, his mind racing. He'd been experimenting with cursed energy manipulation for weeks, trying to come up with something unique. Something powerful. He wasn't just Ricky Gojo, after all. He was Naruto Uzumaki, reborn in a world of sorcery. Maybe it's time to show you something new, Ricky said, a grin spreading across his face. He stretched out his palm, focusing his cursed energy into the center. The energy began to swirl, forming a small vortex that spun faster and faster. The cursed energy took shape, glowing brighter until it resembled a miniature blue sun. The sheer intensity of the energy caused the air around him to crackle. Let's see you handle this, Ricky said, his voice brimming with confidence. The curse charged at him, its wings slicing through the air like guillotines. Ricky didn't flinch. He surged forward, his Rasengan glowing brilliantly in his hand. Timing his attack perfectly, he twisted his body and thrust the vortex of energy into the curse's center. Rasengan. A blinding blue light engulfed the alley, illuminating the surrounding buildings and turning night into day. The force of the impact sent shockwaves rippling outward, shattering windows and rattling the foundations of nearby structures. When the light finally faded, Ricky hovered in the air, his hair flowing like a halo around his face, his sapphire eyes burning with triumph. Below him, the curse disintegrated into nothingness, its existence erased by the sheer force of his technique. Young master. Hina's panicked voice rang out from the ground as a sleek, black Mercedes screeched into the alley. The car door slammed open. And Enji stepped out, his towering presence filling the space. His dark eyes burned with anger as he stormed toward Ricky, who had just floated back to the ground. You have 5 seconds to explain, boy. Enji's voice was thunderous, echoing through the now silent alley. Ricky wiped the sweat from his brow, his grin unbothered. I defeated my first cursed spirit, he said, straightening up. And I created a new technique. He held up his hand, where faint remnants of energy still swirled. Rasengan. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. The dimly lit room was filled with an air of authority and unease. The thin paper curtains separating the Jujutsu higher-ups from the rest of the world cast faint, shifting shadows on the wooden floor. Behind those curtains sat the most powerful and influential figures in the Jujutsu world. Their faces obscured, but their voices dripping with the weight of centuries of tradition and control. The discussion centered on one boy. Ricky Gojo, one voice said, measured but with an undercurrent of tension. 9 years old. 6 eyes and limitless, and now he's crafted a new technique, an anomaly even by our standards. Another voice, older and raspier, chimed in. He exorcised a special grade cursed spirit in Shibuya yesterday. Alone. On his first day in Tokyo. The room fell silent for a moment, the enormity of the statement sinking in. A genius, someone finally murmured. A monster. Another corrected. Yes, a monster, the raspier voice agreed. Monsters with such power and intelligence are dangerous. Especially at such a young age. He could become reckless. Disobedient. Reckless. Scoffed a voice from the far end. He already is. Ignoring his maid's warnings and pursuing a special grade spirit. This child is not only powerful but arrogant. Dangerous arrogance. Then humble him, said a quieter, more authoritative voice. The room seemed to shudder with the weight of the suggestion. And how do we propose to do that? A soft shuffle of paper. Behind the curtains indicated someone pulling out a document. We'll send a notice to NG Gojo, the voice continued, tone icy. Inform him that his son must enroll at Jujutsu High immediately. Murmur of shock rippled through the council. Jujutsu High. But that's a school for teenagers. The boy is 9. The authoritative voice didn't waver. No issues. It's not unprecedented. But the curriculum. The training, he'd be among students much older than him. It could alienate him. Or discipline him. And what of NG Gojo? The man won't take this lightly. Another voice, this one laced with a faint trace of amusement, said. NG Gojo has always been fond of challenges. He'll see this as one, no doubt. The raspier voice spoke again, slower this time. If we're wrong about this, if the boy resents us, rebels against our authority, what then? The room fell silent once more, the gravity of the question hanging heavy. Then we'll deal with him like we've dealt with others before, the authoritative voice said coldly. For now, send the notice. Riki Gojo will attend Jujutsu High. Let us see what he truly is, a prodigy or a problem. The shuffling of papers resumed, and a faint murmur of assent echoed through the room as the decision was finalized. Behind the curtains, unseen by the rest of the world, the future of Riki Gojo was sealed. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. The grand hall of the Gojo estate buzzed with tension. Seated in an ornate chair, NG Gojo, the clan head, exuded authority as he stared at the letter in his hand. Around him, the elders of the clan murmured amongst themselves, their aged faces betraying worry and intrigue. And in the center of it all stood Riki, his purple hoodie slightly wrinkled, his arms crossed defiantly, glowing sapphire eyes darting from one elder to another. NG cleared his throat, silencing the whispers. He held up the letter from the Jujutsu higher-ups, his expression unreadable. Jujutsu High, he said slowly, the weight of the words hanging in the air. At the age of 9. One of the elders, a frail man with a sharp gaze, scoffed. Preposterous. The boy is too young. They want to turn him into a weapon before he even understands what it means to wield his power. Too young. Another elder retorted, her voice sharper. The boy exorcised a special grade curse on his first outing in Tokyo. Alone. If not him, then who? That's not the point, snapped the first elder. What about his safety? His development? Jujutsu High isn't a place for children. Can you do it? NG's voice cut through the argument, directed squarely at Riki. His eyes bore into his son's. A mixture of challenge and curiosity. Riki glanced at the letter in his father's hand, then at the elders. I don't like school, he said bluntly, shrugging. A few elders sighed. One muttered something about his insolence, but NG smirked. You get to fight curses, he offered. That made Riki pause. His eyes narrowed suspiciously. Really? NG nodded. Really? Some of the strongest curses in Japan, too. They won't hold you back like we do here. Riki looked intrigued but hesitated. But, he glanced at the floor, his voice softening. What about Mom? The room grew quiet. The elders exchanged uncomfortable glances, knowing this was a sensitive topic. NG leaned forward, his tone even but firm. What about her? Riki's head snapped up, his glare icy. Don't play games, old man. You only acknowledge her because of me. If I'm not around, his voice trailed off, but the accusation was clear. NG's smirk disappeared. For a moment, his face was unreadable, his gaze piercing. Then, slowly, he nodded. If you go, he said, his voice steady, then you have my word. Nico Gojo will be my responsibility. Riki's eyes narrowed, searching his father's face for any hint of insincerity. The room was silent, the elders holding their breath. Finally, Riki sighed. Give me some time to think. NG leaned back in his chair, a faint smile returning to his lips. Take all the time you need, boy. But don't take too long. Toji Fushiguro lounged in a dimly lit motel room, the flickering light of his laptop reflecting in his sharp, calculating eyes. The faint hum of ceiling fan mixed with the occasional creak of the old building, but Toji paid it no mind. His attention was locked on the website before him, a notorious, underground bounty page, a hub where iNation jobs were posted for the right price. He scrolled lazily through the list, his finger pausing at the top of the page. The name blazed in bold letters, along with a bounty so astronomical it seemed almost comical. Ricky Gojo. The kid's name had been sitting at the top of the list for years now, untouched and untouchable. The reward promised riches beyond imagination, enough to retire 100 times over. But it was also a death sentence for anyone foolish enough to try. Toji leaned back in his chair, the screen casting a pale glow on his scarred face. He took a sip from his half-empty beer can and chuckled softly to himself. A kid, huh? He muttered, tapping the name with a calloused finger. The profile displayed a grainy photo of Ricky, a young boy with striking white hair and glowing sapphire eyes. The description listed his abilities in chilling detail: 6 eyes, limitless, and an uncanny knack for creating new techniques. Toji's grin widened as he read. They really think someone's gonna pull this off. He shut the laptop with a sharp snap and stretched his arms, the tension in his muscles releasing with a satisfying crack. For a moment, he considered what it would mean to take the job. To go after the boy who had every sorcerer in Japan whispering in fear and awe. But then, Toji snorted. Not worth the hassle, he muttered, tossing the empty beer can into the trash. He wasn't stupid. Even for him, Toji Fushiguro, the sorcerer killer, this job screamed suicide. The kid was a prodigy, a monster in the making, and unlike anything Toji had faced before. Besides, he wasn't interested in chasing clout or proving himself. He had his own goals, his own priorities. Let someone else be dumb enough to try, he said, grabbing his jacket and heading for the door. The dark streets called to him. And Toji always had other ways to make money. As he stepped out into the night, a small smirk tugged at his lips. The world could keep its absurd bounties and impossible missions. He'd survive by playing smart. Not playing hero, or martyr. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. Ricky tossed and turned in his bed, the once peaceful rhythm of his breathing turning erratic. In the recesses of his mind, a dream unfolded, a surreal and terrifying vision that felt too vivid to be a mere product of his imagination. Poisonous vines, thick and dark, slithered up his arms and legs like living chains, their thorns biting into his flesh. He struggled against them, but they only tightened, their venom seeping into his veins. He could feel it, a sickly, burning sensation spreading through his body, threatening to consume him. Ahead, a volcano loomed. Its size dwarfing any mountain he had ever seen. Rivers of molten lava snaked down its sides, the heat so intense it warped the air and scorched his skin even from a distance. The sky above was an eerie shade of red, heavy with ash and smoke, as if the heavens themselves were bleeding. And then came the hands. Thousands of them, grotesque and malformed, emerging from the shadows. They reached for him. Clawing and grasping, their sheer number overwhelming. Each hand was cold and lifeless, yet their grip burned with an unnatural malice. At the center of it all stood a figure, a monster with pink hair, its body a grotesque amalgamation of flesh and curses. 4 arms jutted out from its torso, each one holding a cursed object that seemed to hum with power. Its eyes, cold and cruel, locked onto Ricky, and a sinister grin spread across its face. Ricky tried to run, but the vines, the hands, the overwhelming presence of the monster, they all converged on him. He felt helpless, trapped. And for the first time in his young life, truly afraid. With a gasp, he woke up, his body drenched in sweat and his heart pounding against his ribcage. The room was dark, still. And except for the sound of his own ragged breathing. He sat up, running a hand through his white hair, his glowing sapphire eyes scanning the room as if expecting the nightmare to follow him into reality. Was this a normal dream? Or something more? They said the 6 eyes never lied. They didn't give false promises or false information. Ricky clenched his fists, the weight of the dream settling on his shoulders. If this was a warning, he would heed it. All right, he muttered to himself, his voice steady despite the lingering fear. I'll do it. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood, determination burning in his eyes. He would go to Jujutsu High. He would learn everything, push himself harder, and be ready for anything. To protect the weak. To make sure his mom was safe. To change the Gojo clan from its archaic ways. To change the world. With a deep breath, Ricky made his decision. There was no turning back now. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. Kaori Itadori lay on the hospital bed, her body weak but her spirit alight with satisfaction. The sterile scent of disinfectant hung in the air, mingling with the soft cries of her newborn son, Yuji Itadori, who was swaddled snugly in a pale blue blanket. His tiny fists waved in the air, as though already eager to grab the world by its collar. Jin Itadori, her husband, was practically glowing with joy, his energy boundless as he gently rocked the baby. His wide grin hadn't faltered for a second since Yuji had entered the world. He's perfect, Jin declared, his voice thick with emotion. Our little Yuji. Kaori watched him, her tired eyes softening. Jin's happiness was infectious. And though her body screamed for rest, she managed a small chuckle. Careful, Jin, she teased weakly, you'll smother him with all that bouncing. Jin laughed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. How could I not be excited? Look at him. Meanwhile, in the corner of the room, Wasuke Itadori stood stiffly, his aged frame leaning slightly on a cane. His face was as stern as ever. His deep-set eyes flicking between Kaori and the baby with a mix of wariness and something softer, something almost like affection. He had never liked Kaori. Not her sharp tongue, not her fiery determination. And certainly not the way she had swept his son off his feet. She wasn't what he had envisioned for Jin, a simple, unassuming partner who would quietly support the family. Kaori was none of that. She was clever, ambitious, and far too aware of her own charm. And yet, as he looked at his grandson, something shifted in Wasuke's chest. The tiny boy had Jin's nose and Kaori's determined little pout. And as Yuji let out a small sneeze, Wasuke's frown deepened, not in disapproval, but in reluctant fondness. He's sturdy, Wasuke muttered gruffly, his tone far less biting than usual. Kaori caught the slight change. Her sharp instincts picking up on the subtle softening in his expression. She hid her smirk behind a yawn, too tired to gloat but not above savoring the moment. Thank you, father, she said politely. Though her voice carried a faint edge of triumph. Wasuke only grunted in response, but his gaze lingered on Yuji for a moment longer before he turned away, his grip on his cane tightening. Jin, oblivious to the unspoken tension, was still enraptured by his son. He's going to be amazing, he said, his eyes shining with unshakable belief. Strong, kind, and exactly what the world needs. Kaori finished, her voice a soft murmur. Jin turned to her, his smile widening. Exactly. But as Kaori leaned back against the pillows, her mind was far from the warm, familial scene playing out around her. Her plan was working. Yuji was perfect, a healthy, strong boy with the potential to be everything she had envisioned. He was the key, the culmination of years of calculated decisions and carefully played moves. Jin's boundless optimism and Wasuke's cautious approval were merely stepping stones. The real game was just beginning. Kaori's smile deepened, though her eyes glinted with something colder. Sharper. As Yuji let out a tiny yawn, Kaori reached out to stroke his cheek, her fingers trembling with exhaustion but steady with purpose. Sleep well, my little star, she whispered. Her voice low enough that only the baby could hear. We have so much to do. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. Nico paced the length of the Gojo estate's sunlit veranda, wringing her hands as her thoughts spiraled. She stopped mid-step, looked toward Ricky's room, then sighed heavily, her pale blue kimono fluttering in the soft breeze. Her boy. Her little Ricky. Off to a high school for sorcerers, far from home. Before he was even 10 years old. Fighting curses. Curses. She shuddered at the thought. Sure, Ricky was a genius, blessed with the 6 eyes and the limitless technique, but he was still her baby. Who would cook his favorite ramen just the way he liked it, with extra soft boiled eggs and just a hint of miso? Who would make sure the broth wasn't too salty? Who would remind him to blow on his noodles so he didn't burn his tongue? And bathing. Her son hated washing his hair. Who would chase him around with a towel when he tried to skip drying his hair after a bath? Who would scrub his back? To make sure he didn't leave soap suds everywhere. Oh, Ricky, she murmured, her voice trembling. The thought of him in some cold dormitory, eating bland cafeteria food and fighting off curses, tore at her heart. Sure, Hina would be there, but a maid wasn't the same as a mother. Who would tuck him in at night and remind him to brush his teeth? Who would listen to his silly jokes and watch him bounce around, overflowing with energy? She sank into a wicker chair, her hands clutching her cheeks. It's too soon, she whispered to herself. He's just a little boy. A prodigy, yes, but still a child. Enji's voice from earlier that day echoed in her mind. He needs this, Nico. He's destined for greatness. Holding him back won't change that. Greatness. She didn't care about greatness. All she wanted was her son to be safe and happy. But then she remembered Ricky's determined eyes as he made his decision. That fire in his gaze, that unshakable resolve, it was so much like his father's, like Enji's. Maybe I'm worrying too much, she whispered, though her voice betrayed her doubt. But, who'll make sure he remembers to wear socks that match? Nico's head tilted toward the sound of soft footsteps approaching. It was Ricky, rubbing his sleepy eyes as he emerged from his room. His hair was a tousled mess, his oversized purple hoodie slipping off one shoulder. Mom, he mumbled. Why are you up so early? Her heart melted. Oh, sweetie. She pulled him into her arms, holding him tight as if she could shield him from the world. I was just thinking about things. Ricky wriggled free, giving her a lopsided grin. You're thinking too hard again, Mom. I'll be fine. Who's going to cook your ramen, huh? She said, poking his forehead. He shrugged. I'll learn to make it myself. And who'll remind you to take baths? Ricky smirked. Hina will. Nico groaned dramatically, clutching her chest. My baby's growing up too fast. Mom, Ricky said, rolling his eyes but hugging her again. I'll be okay. I promise. She buried her face in his soft, snowy hair, fighting back tears. You'd better be. And as she held him, Nico realized that no matter how worried she was, she had to trust him. He wasn't just her little boy anymore. He was Ricky Gojo, destined to change the world. The crisp morning air was filled with the bustle of last-minute preparations. Nico bustled about, making sure Ricky's suitcase was perfectly packed. Every fold of his clothes was crisp, every item meticulously placed. Do you have enough socks? What about underwear? Oh, and don't forget your toothbrush. Actually, I'll just pack two, she muttered. Half to herself and half to Ricky, who was leaning against the car with his arms crossed, looking supremely unimpressed. Mom, he groaned. It's not like I'm leaving forever. Nico didn't seem to hear him. And remember, no skipping meals. If the cafeteria food is bad, call me. I'll send you something. And for heaven's sake, don't overwork yourself. You need sleep, young man. Ricky rolled his eyes. I'm not going to war, Mom. It's just school. By the car, Hina sat in the front seat beside the driver, quietly observing the scene with a small smile. The maids, however, weren't as restrained. Young master, you'll write to us, won't you? Don't forget about us, okay? We'll miss you. If you need anything, anything at all, you know we're just a phone call away. Geez. Ricky muttered under his breath. You'd think I was moving to another dimension. Remember to come home every Sunday, every holiday, and every vacation, Nico said, ignoring him entirely. Mom, seriously. I'm talking, Ricky. She snapped, wagging a finger at him. Enji sighed audibly, pinching the bridge of his nose. If you're done with the dramatics. Nico spun around, her hands clasped. Oh, sorry, Donna-sama. Enji shook his head before crouching slightly to meet Ricky's eye level. His gaze was firm, his voice calm but commanding. Listen to me, Ricky. The world outside is cruel. The higher-ups are not your friends. Be wary of them. Prove yourself, not just because of the six eyes or the limitless, but because of your character and your strength. Ricky straightened up a little, nodding solemnly. I get it, old man. Quote. With that, Enji stood, and the Volkswagen's engine roared to life. Nico hugged Ricky one last time, her grip a little too tight, before reluctantly letting him go. The car started rolling forward. Bye, Mom. Bye, old man. Bye, big sisters. Bye, geezers. Ricky yelled from the backseat, waving out the window. Nico and the maids waved frantically, tears streaming down their faces. Take care, Ricky. We'll miss you. Enji merely shook his head. Theatrics. And so, the Volkswagen sped down the driveway, heading toward Tokyo City, the sprawling metropolis waiting to change Ricky Gojo's life forever. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. Masachi Yaga rubbed his temples as he read the letter for what felt like the 100th time. The higher-ups had really outdone themselves this time. A 9-year-old is the only first-year student of the year. And not just any kid, a Gojo. The Gojo heir. 6 eyes. Limitless. A walking headache with a fancy surname. He glanced at the bolded sentence again. Yaga Masachi must be his homeroom teacher for as long as Riki Gojo is in Tokyo Jujutsu High. Yaga groaned and leaned back in his chair, glaring at the ceiling. Quitting sounds better every day, he muttered under his breath. The soft hum of the desktop monitor caught his attention. The live feed from the security camera showed a sleek, shiny Volkswagen pulling up to the base of the mountain. A tall, white-haired maid gracefully stepped out first, her posture impeccable despite the massive luggage she casually pulled from the trunk. Then came the boy. Riki Gojo stepped out with the kind of nonchalant confidence only someone with that name could muster. His snow-white hair glinted in the sunlight, and his cold, glowing sapphire eyes scanned the area as if he owned it. Yaga's hand froze on the desk when the boy turned directly toward the camera. The 6 eyes didn't just look at it, they pierced through it. For a moment, Yaga swore the kid was staring into his soul. And then, to add insult to injury, the boy winked. Yaga closed his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose. This is going to be a nightmare. The monitor screen flickered, showing the maid hoisting the massive suitcase like it weighed nothing. The boy casually strolling beside her. They started ascending the steep stone steps leading to the school. Yaga glanced back at the bolded sentence in the letter. Why me? With a resigned sigh, he stood up. Grabbing his coat and cane. He had a job to do, like it or not. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. Meanwhile, on the steps of Jujutsu High, Riki walked ahead of Hina, hands in his pockets. Big mountain, he said casually. Glancing up at the seemingly endless stairs. It's part of the training, young master, Hina replied smoothly, effortlessly carrying the luggage. The higher-ups likely think it builds character. Riki smirked. Character, huh? I guess they've never had to climb this with a suitcase. Would you like me to carry you too? Hina teased, her usual calm tone laced with sarcasm. Please, Riki said dramatically. Throwing his arms in the air. Carry me, my noble steed. Hina gave him a side glance but couldn't help the small smile tugging at her lips. As they climbed higher, Rik's gaze wandered to the sprawling view of Tokyo below, the bustling city looking like a toy model from their vantage point. His sharp eyes picked out distant skyscrapers, the crisscross of streets, and the faint glow of cursed energy lingering over certain areas. Not bad, he murmured. Not bad, indeed, Hina agreed, her tone softening. The two continued their ascent, the imposing gates of Jujutsu High coming into view at the top of the stairs. Riki's steps slowed as he took in the ancient architecture. Well, he said, stretching his arms behind his head. Guess this is home now. Hina paused beside him, placing the suitcase down with a faint thud. Indeed. Welcome to Jujutsu High, young master. Inside, Yaga Masachi stood near the main entrance, arms crossed, watching the two figures approach. 9 years old. He thought again, shaking his head. The boy stopped a few paces away, looking up at Yaga with those piercing eyes. So, Riki said, a playful grin tugging at his lips. You're my babysitter. Yaga sighed deeply. This kid's going to be the death of me. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. Yaga sat cross-legged on a tatami mat, arms crossed as he eyed the two individuals before him. Hina, the epitome of poise, stood with her hands folded. Her white braids cascading like a waterfall. Beside her, Riki sprawled lazily in the chair, arms over the backrest, legs swinging nonchalantly. I don't care how much the higher-ups vouch for you. Yaga began, his tone curt. You're not a student until I say so. Fail my test, and you're out. Riki shrugged, flashing a cocky grin. Sure, teach. And call me with respect. You're not my teacher yet. Teach. Yaga's temple visibly twitched, but he held back a retort, turning toward the door. Follow me. Hina raised an elegant eyebrow but didn't question the man. Meanwhile, Riki trailed behind with an amused smirk. The quarters were modest, a small room with tatami flooring, low lighting, and a desk in the corner. It was worlds apart from the grandeur Riki was used to in the Gojo estate. Yaga plopped onto a stool in the corner, his eyes narrowing as he regarded the white-haired boy. Why do you want to join Jujutsu High School? Riki scratched his chin, pretending to think. I was forced to. Yaga's glare was sharp enough to cut steel. Wrong answer. The room darkened suddenly, shadows flickering ominously along the walls. A faint creak broke the silence. And before Ricky could quip back, a horde of wooden puppets surged from the corners of the room. Their sharp, jagged movements and glowing red eyes were menacing enough to make most people flinch. But not Ricky. The puppets stopped dead in their tracks, mere inches from him. The faint shimmer of an invisible barrier surrounded the boy, his infinity rendering the attack utterly pointless. Yaga's brows furrowed. TCH. This kid's going to be trouble. Ricky leaned back in his chair, feigning boredom. Is this supposed to be hard? The tension in the air grew palpable, and even Hina glanced awkwardly between the two men. Sensing the awkwardness, Ricky decided to lighten the mood. He stood up dramatically, pointing at Yaga with the kind of exaggerated flair only a child could pull off. In the name of righteousness. I'll punish you, cursed spirits. He declared, voice brimming with confidence. Yaga blinked, unimpressed. Sailor Moon, really? At least come up with something original. Ricky froze mid-pose. His face heating up. You know Sailor Moon. Yaga deadpanned. I'm not that old. Try again. Flustered, Ricky scratched his head. I'm gonna be king of the sorcerers. Yaga sighed heavily, pinching the bridge of his nose. Luffy. You're just recycling shonen lines now. Ricky groaned. Fine. He straightened up, his tone suddenly serious. I want to change the world. To protect people like my mom. To help the weak. And, yeah, maybe because I'm the strongest, I feel like it's my responsibility to actually do something about it. Believe it. The room fell silent for a moment. Yaga leaned back, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. You pass. Really? Ricky perked up, surprised. Yaga gave him a sly look. Even though it seems like you copied that from Naruto. Ricky rolled his eyes dramatically. How do I tell him I was Naruto? Yaga pointed toward the door. You're officially a student now. Head to your dorm. But when Yaga glanced back, Ricky was already gone. Through the open door, he caught a glimpse of the boy darting down the hallway, exploring the school with childlike curiosity. Hina chuckled softly. I'll put his things in his dorm. Yaga sighed, waving her off. Fine. And you can stay in the girls' dorm. Hina tilted her head slightly, her serene smile never faltering. I'd rather stay in the room beside him. Why? He has a midnight eating habit, she replied matter-of-factly. Yaga stared at her, utterly deadpan. Ricky strolled through the sprawling grounds of Jujutsu High, his glowing sapphire eyes taking in the peculiar mix of ancient tradition and modern convenience. Ornate torii gates stood beside sleek surveillance cameras, and cobblestone pathways led to state-of-the-art training halls. It was like someone had mashed up a shrine in a sci-fi movie, and honestly, he kind of liked it. So this is where the strongest sorcerers train, he murmured, hands in his pockets. Kinda empty, though. It didn't take long for him to realize why. The school felt deserted, no students. No bustling classrooms, just the occasional bird chirping or distant hum of cicadas. He checked a notice board and found it blank. Even the cafeteria was spotless but devoid of life. I'm the only one here. He leaned back against a column, groaning. What? Did the higher-ups run out of sorcerer kids to bully? He heard a distant shout, Yaga's unmistakable gruff voice echoing through the hallways. Ricky. Get back here. But Ricky wasn't interested in another lecture. He smirked and looked up. The sky stretched endlessly above him, painted in hues of orange and purple as the sun began to set. With a flicker of cursed energy beneath his feet, he launched himself into the air. Yaga stormed through the halls, his frustration mounting. Where is that brat? He muttered, checking empty classrooms and shadowed corners. I should have known he'd be a pain. A stray breeze ruffled his hair, and he paused, frowning. Something was off. He glanced toward the large wind. OWS lining the hallway and caught a faint shimmer in the sky. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. High above the school, Ricky floated effortlessly, his limitless technique ensuring he had perfect control over his movements. He stretched his arms, letting the cool evening air whip through his hair. This is the life, he said to himself, spinning lazily in midair. No elders nagging me, no maids foos. Sing over my clothes, just me and the sky. He flipped onto his back, staring at the horizon. The city of Tokyo glittered faintly in the distance, a reminder of how far he'd come, and how far he still had to go. As he drifted, His thoughts wandered. The dream he'd had the night before still lingered in his mind, the images of poisonous vines, monstrous volcanoes, and that eerie pink-haired creature etched vividly into his memory. Was it a warning? He wondered aloud. His fingers curled instinctively, energy flickering faintly around them. Or just my brain messing with me? A loud, exasperated shout broke through his musings. Ricky! Get down here! Ricky glanced down to see Yaga standing on the ground, arms crossed and looking thoroughly unamused. The man's tanned skin seemed to glow in the fading sunlight. But his expression was as thunderous as a storm cloud. Caught me already, huh? Ricky smirked, lowering himself just enough to be within earshot. You know, Teach, you've got quite the pair of lungs. Yaga didn't rise to the bait. Get down now. With a dramatic sigh, Ricky descended, landing gracefully on the grass. He brushed imaginary dust off his sleeves and gave Yaga his most charming grin. You called. Yaga stared at him, unblinking. You're going to be the death of me, aren't you? Ricky shrugged. Probably. But hey, at least you'll have front row seats to the rise of the greatest sorcerer of all time. Yaga's response was a flat, unimpressed glare. Ricky tilted his head, pretending to think. No. Too much. Okay, how about, hard-working student with endless potential? Better. Yaga groaned, pinching the bridge of his nose. Why did I agree to this? You didn't, Ricky pointed out, his grin widening. The higher-ups made you. And I'm already regretting it. Despite his words, Yaga couldn't help but notice the boy's raw talent. The ease with which Ricky controlled his cursed energy, the confidence in his every movement, it wasn't just arrogance. The kid truly had the potential to back it up. Alright, enough messing around, Yaga finally said. You've got a long way to go before you can call yourself the greatest. Starting tomorrow, you'll train harder than you've ever trained before. Ricky's eyes sparkled with excitement. Bring it on. As Yaga turned to leave, Ricky glanced back at the sky one last time. Tomorrow, huh? Guess I'd better make it count. First lesson in the classroom. And Ricky sat slouched on a bench, his chin propped up by one hand, looking utterly bored. Across from him, Yaga's eyebrows twitched like they were trying to break free from his face. What? Ricky asked, his voice laced with lazy curiosity. Yaga jabbed a finger in Hina's direction, who stood dutifully beside Ricky, arms crossed, looking as professional as ever in her aided white hair and immaculate maid uniform. Why is she here? I am here in case young master needs anything, Hina replied smoothly, glancing at Ricky. Do you need anything, young master? Nah, but, Ricky tapped his chin. Some chips would be nice. Gojo. Yes. Yes. Both Ricky and Hina responded in perfect unison, their sapphire eyes locking onto Yaga with innocent curiosity. Yaga's eye twitched. He sighed heavily, dragging a hand down his face. Of course. Same clan, same attitude. Ricky Gojo, Yaga snapped, tell your maid to leave the classroom. Why? Ricky tilted his head. Because I said so. No. Ricky leaned back, grinning. You want some ice cream, Teach? Let's just start the class, Yaga muttered, already feeling the beginnings of a headache. The lesson began, but Ricky's attention span seemed to have evaporated within minutes. Yaga was going over cursed energy manipulation basics, stuff any sorcerer needed to know. Every minute, Ricky let out a loud, exaggerated yawn. Yaga ignored it the first few times, but by the fifth yawn, his patience snapped. Ricky, would you stop that? This is a classroom, not your bedroom. Show some manners. But it's so boring. Ricky whined, stretching dramatically. Boring. I mastered all this stuff when I was a toddler, you know. Yaga froze. Of course you did, he muttered under his breath, pinching the bridge of his nose. Fine. Let's test that genius brain of yours. He marched to the board and scribbled a complicated logarithmic function, one that most high school students would have cried at. Solve this. Ricky stood up, sauntered over to the board, and picked up a piece of chalk. Without hesitation, he skipped all the intermediary steps and wrote down the answer in one fluid motion. Done, Ricky announced, tossing the chalk back into the tray. Yaga stared at the answer, his frown deepening. This is correct, he admitted grudgingly. Hina clapped loudly, her applause echoing in the quiet classroom. Young master is so brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, Ricky said, bowing theatrically. Yaga glared at him. Don't get cocky. Ricky smirked. Too late. With the entire day off, Ricky didn't waste a second sitting in the boring, stuffy classroom. Instead, he dragged Hina to the basketball court he'd spotted during his earlier exploration of the school grounds. The court was surprisingly well maintained for a place with no other students. The polished floor gleamed under the sunlight streaming in through the large windows. Ricky grabbed a ball, spinning it effortlessly on his finger as he looked at Hina, who stood on the sidelines. Her arms crossed. Come on, Hina. Don't just stand there all made like. Let's play. Young master, I don't think this counts as training, Hina said, raising an eyebrow. It's not about training. It's about fun. He grinned. Plus, I'm gonna show you how a genius plays ball. Hina sighed but relented, rolling up the sleeves of her pristine uniform. Alright, but don't expect me to go easy on you. Ricky tossed the ball to her with a smirk. I wouldn't dream of it. The game started, and to Hina's surprise, Ricky wasn't all talk. He moved with an almost supernatural agility, weaving past her with ease. His dribbling was flashy, almost cocky, as if he was showing off just how far his reflexes and precision could take him. Is that all you've got? Ricky teased, effortlessly sinking a three-pointer. Hina narrowed her eyes. You asked for it, young master. From that point, Hina kicked it up a notch. Despite her role as a maid, she was still a grade 1 sorcerer with impeccable control over her body. She blocked his shots, snatched the ball midair, and scored repeatedly, leaving Ricky dumbfounded. Wait, time out. Ricky called, holding up his hands as he leaned against his knees, panting. You're cheating or something. Hina smirked. I warned you not to underestimate me. Ricky wiped the sweat from his brow, then grinned. Alright, no more holding back. He activated his infinity, making it nearly impossible for her to get close to him. Hina groaned, muttering about how unfair it was, but Ricky just laughed. The game continued, filled with playful banter, dramatic flops, and Ricky's exaggerated victory dances every time he scored. By the time the sun started to set, both of them were sitting on the court floor, catching their breath. You're pretty good, Ricky admitted, leaning back on his hands. You're not so bad yourself, young master, Hina replied, offering him a bottle of water from her ever-ready bag. Ricky took it, grinning. Best maid ever. Don't push your luck, she said. But there was a hint of a smile on her face. As Ricky tilted the bottle of water to his lips, his eyes wandered lazily across the school grounds. Then his gaze froze, fixed on the far eastern end of the campus. The air seemed to shimmer faintly in that direction, though to most, it would appear entirely ordinary. But not to Ricky. His 6 eyes picked up on it. Instantly, an overwhelming concentration of cursed energy, dense and ancient, emanating from a place hidden within the labyrinthine halls of Jujutsu High. The Star Corridors. He had heard about it in P. Asing, an enigmatic network of passageways said to lead to the heart of Jujutsu High's most sacred space. And at the center of it all, Master Tengen. Tengen was more than a person. She was a being suspended between mortality and eternity. A pillar that kept the balance of cursed energy in Japan stable. Despite being ancient, she didn't look the part. Her form had long since transcended human appearances, becoming something alien and unsettling. Tengen's purpose was crucial, acting as the anchor for the barriers protecting the Jujutsu society. Without her, chaos would reign. Yet, her presence came with a price. Every 500 years, her body had to merge with a compatible vessel to maintain her human faculties, lest she become something unrecognizable. For a 9-year-old, Ricky knew far too much about things most sorcerers barely grasped. The elders back at the Gojo estate had lectured him about Tengen, hoping he would one day inherit their legacy of overseeing the star plasma vessel ritual. But those talks always felt more like lectures about his responsibilities rather than genuine education. Still, Ricky had always been curious about Tengen. What did she look like now? What was it to hold the weight of so many lives and centuries on her shoulders? And why did he feel like she might know something about him, his past life? He took a long sip of water, his thoughts swirling. He'd find time to explore the star corridors, later. Are you ready for a rematch, young master? Hina's voice snapped him back to reality. She stood there, arms crossed and an eager glint in her eye. A fresh basketball tucked under one arm. Ricky smirked, standing up and stretching. Oh, you're going down this time. Is that so? She teased, spinning the ball on her finger. Definitely, Ricky replied, tossing his empty water bottle into a nearby bin without looking. Perfect shot, of course. And with that, they headed back to the court. Ricky's thoughts of Tengen temporarily shelved as he focused on avenging his earlier loss. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. In the vast, serene expanse of light that seemed to stretch infinitely, Master Tengen sat cross-legged, her form neither wholly human nor entirely inhuman. The soft glow of her domain illuminated her featureless face, a mask of neutrality that concealed the millennia of knowledge she carried. For centuries, she had remained undisturbed, meditating on the ebb and flow of cursed energy across the land. But today, something shifted. Her eyes snapped open, the light of her space pulsing faintly in response to her heightened awareness. Far away, yet vividly clear in her perception, she felt him. Kenjaku. That cursed puppeteer, whose twisted ambitions had long plagued the balance she worked tirelessly to maintain. He was inhabiting a female body this time. Cradling a pink-haired infant with golden eyes. The baby cooed softly, oblivious to the grotesque intentions of the one nursing him. Kenjaku's schemes always left a sour taste in her energy. His centuries-long ambition to meld curses and humans into a singular entity had threatened the very fabric of existence before, and now, it seemed, he was laying the groundwork for something even darker. Tengen's awareness spread further, sifting through the myriad threads of fate. Sorcerers, curses, and non-sorcerers alike flashed through her vision, their lives intertwined in an intricate web of possibilities. And then, she felt it. The six eyes. Her form stilled, though her ethereal energy rippled in quiet acknowledgement. He was here. Already here. Though a child, the bearer of six eyes radiate. Power that surpassed almost all sorcerers of the current age. His cursed energy burned bright, pure, and unyielding, a beacon that couldn't be ignored. It was no wonder her attention had been drawn to him. Tengen could feel his curiosity brushing against her barriers, his gaze lingering on the easternmost corner of the school. She could almost sense his thoughts, questions about her purpose. About the truths hidden within the corridors leading to her sanctuary. The six-eyes child would grow stronger. That was a certainty. And as his strength grew, so too would the forces aligning against him. Kenjaku was moving. The cursed spirits were restless. And the balance of the world teetered on a knife's edge. For a brief moment, Tengen considered intervening. The thought flickered like a candle's flame. Tempting but fleeting. She had never interfered in the matters of the Jujutsu Society. Her purpose was to anchor the barriers, to preserve balance, not to dictate the affairs of sorcerers and curses. This wouldn't be an exception. But as her awareness returned to her meditative state, she couldn't shake the image of the boy with six eyes, a child now, yet destined to face unimaginable burdens. If only the world were kinder. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. Ricky sat cross-legged on the floor of his dorm room, the glow from the bedside lamp casting soft shadows against the walls. The room was quiet, save for the faint hum of the city below. Hina had left him alone for the night, though not without a ridiculous amount of motherly fussing. The peace was rare, and Ricky planned to use it. He rubbed his hands together. Excitement gleaming in his sapphire eyes. All right, let's see if this works, he murmured. Gathering his cursed energy, he focused it into his hands. The familiar flow of power tingled against his skin, reminding him of chakra from his past life. Shadow clones had been second nature to him back then, a staple of his identity as Naruto Uzumaki. But now, cursed energy had replaced chakra. And nothing had worked quite the same. Still, if anyone could figure this out, it was him. Okay, he whispered, breathing deeply. Mold the energy, split the essence, replicate the form. He concentrated harder, pouring cursed energy into the technique. For a moment, the air in front of him shimmered. A faint outline appeared, a flicker of what could have been. And then, it fizzled out. PFF'd. Ricky groaned. Flopping backward onto the floor, his arms splayed out dramatically. Man, cursed energy sucks for this kind of thing, he muttered, staring at the ceiling. Shadow clones weren't just about duplicating form, they required a perfect balance of energy distribution and intent. Chakra was versatile and intuitive for that purpose. Cursed energy. Not so much. It was temperamental, volatile, and inherently combative. No shortcuts in this life, huh? He grumbled, sitting up and scratching his head. He tried again, pouring cursed energy into his hands. The same shimmer appeared, but no matter how much he adjusted his technique, it refused to coalesce into a proper clone. After a few more attempts, he gave up with an exaggerated sigh, leaning back against the bed. Guess I'll have tea. Oh, stick to good old-fashioned fists and brains for now, he said to himself. Still, he couldn't help but smirk. If cursed energy wouldn't let him copy his old tricks, maybe it was time to invent some new ones. The thought sent a surge of excitement through him. Shadow clones or not, he was Riki Gojo now. And that meant endless possibilities. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. The grand hall echoed with the soft hum of flutes and the rhythmic thrum of drums. Incense filled the air, mingling with the rich aroma of meticulously prepared food. The Gojo clan knew how to throw a celebration, and for their prodigious heir's 10th birthday, no expense was spared. Riki sat cross-legged on an elevated dais, dressed in a pristine white kimono adorned with delicate blue dandelions. The fabric was soft against his skin, but the weig of tradition felt heavier than the garment itself. His sapphire eyes scanned the crowd, elders bowing, clan members chatting, servants rushing with trays of food. Beyond the grand walls of the estate, he could hear the muffled cheers of villagers tossing flowers in his honor. He adjusted the stiff collar of his kimono, suppressing the urge to groan. His mother, Nico, had spent nearly an hour making sure he looked perfect. Brushing his hair until it gleamed and arranging the folds of his attire with obsessive care. You are the pride of the Gojo clan, she had said before sending him off with a kiss on his forehead. Pride or not, Riki felt like a decorative doll on display. The ceremony was overwhelming. Traditional dances with masked performers swept across the floor, their movements intricate and precise. Plays depicting the Gojo clan's ancient victories were staged, complete with booming narrators and dramatic lighting. Every detail was carefully curated to highlight the greatness of his lineage. And the food. Oh, the food was incredible. Platters of perfectly grilled fish, delicate sushi rolls, steaming bowls of miso soup, and desserts that seemed too beautiful to eat. If the was one thing Riki couldn't complain about, it was the food. He'd stuffed himself silly, though even that had earned him disapproving looks from a few elders. But the rest. He was tired. Tired of smiling until his cheeks hurt. Of bowing repeatedly, and of shaking hands with every elder in attendance, some of whom smelled strongly of mothballs and old perfume. As the last of the guests departed and the grand hall fell silent, only the core members of the Gojo clan remained. The moonlight streamed through the ornate paper screens, casting a silvery glow over the room. In the center, Riki sat cross-legged on a cushioned mat. His white kimono still pristine despite the long day. His glowing sapphire eyes scanned the room, flicking between the stern faces of the elders and the towering figure of his father, Enji. Seated at the highest position between them. The atmosphere was heavy, a sense of importance crackling in the air. The elders spoke first, their voices aged but steady. They congratulated Riki for reaching his 10th year, praising the pride and honor he had brought to the family and the clan. The Gojo clan stands as the strongest, now more than ever, one of them declared. His tone filled with both pride and expectation. Then, as though by tradition, they turned their praise to Enji, the clan head, acknowledging his leadership and strength. The words seemed to carry the usual air of formality. Perhaps even flattery, but Riki caught the subtle glances exchanged between them. Surprisingly, they didn't stop there. One elder, after clearing his throat, added a line of praise for Nico, Riki's mother. The comment was brief and veiled in politeness, but it was there. Riki raised an eyebrow at that. His mother rarely got this sort of recognition. Still, he couldn't help but smirk faintly, knowing she'd probably bask in that one line for weeks. Finally, the room fell silent once more. One of the elders, the eldest of them all, leaned forward, his voice taking on a ceremonial tone. Tonight, he began, we shall pass down the second technique of Limitless to the heir of the six eyes. Riki straightened slightly. His infinity barrier, the first and most fundamental of Limitless techniques, had been with him for years now. Tonight, however, he would receive the next piece of the puzzle, blue. The elder gestured to the priest standing beside the carved bird statue at the edge of the room. The priest raised a wooden staff and struck the hollowed tree trunk beneath the statue. A deep, resonant vibration spread through the room, shaking the floor and walls. The bird statue trembled. And a scroll slipped from the tip of its claws, spiraling downward. The priest stepped forward, catching the scroll midair with practiced precision. With slow, deliberate movements, he unrolled it and carried it toward Ricky. The ancient parchment, inscribed with intricate diagrams and text, stopped just inches from Ricky's face. 30 seconds passed in absolute silence. Then, the priest stepped back, rolling the scroll back up before tossing it high into the air. The scroll spun gracefully before finding its way back to the hawk statue's claws, where it settled as if it had never moved. 30 seconds might not have been enough for anyone else to even grasp the basics, but for the bearer of the 6 eyes, it was more than enough. Every detail, every formula, every technique etched into that scroll was already committed to Ricky's memory. The elders motioned for him to proceed, their aged hands gesturing with a mix of expectation and doubt. Around the room, murmurs spread like ripples in still water. Can he really do it? One of the maids whispered, her voice barely audible. He just saw the scroll. It's impossible, muttered a young man, his skepticism laced with intrigue. Talented, sure. But this fast? A woman commented, glancing nervously at the elders. From the balcony, Nico stood silently, her elegant form framed by the moonlight. She didn't speak. But her furrowed brow betrayed her concern. Ricky was her son, her pride, but even she wondered if this moment was too soon. In the center of the room, Ricky inhaled deeply, his chest rising and falling as he calmed his nerves. He slowly stood, his white kimono catching the moonlight and making him appear almost ethereal. With deliberate steps, he moved toward the courtyard, all eyes on him. The crowd's murmurs ceased, replaced by a tension so thick it could be sliced with a blade. Stopping at the edge of the room, Ricky raised his hands, pointing toward the still pond nestled in the courtyard. Faint ripples on its surface reflected the stars above, a serene mirror that betrayed no hint of what was to come. Cursed technique, he began, his voice calm but commanding. Every ear in the room strained to hear. Limitless. Amplify blue. The room went utterly silent. Even the breeze seemed to hold its breath. For a moment, nothing happened. A man in the back whispered, "Did anything even?" The water answered them. With a sudden, otherworldly motion, the pond erupted. Water surged upward in a swirling vortex, spiraling higher and higher, a twisting column of liquid defying gravity. Gall. Den fish trapped within the vortex swam gracefully, their scales catching the light like tiny, moving stars. Gasps filled the room. The vortex spun faster, its shape tightening into a flawless, translucent tornado. The goldfish continued their mesmerizing dance, their movements fluid and hypnotic, as if choreographed by the universe itself. Ricky's glowing sapphire eyes narrowed in focus. He extended his hand, and the vortex obeyed. Moving as if tethered to his will. It rose higher, leaving the pond entirely, suspended in midair like a divine spectacle. The vortex swayed gracefully, each movement deliberate and precise. Guided by the silent commands of its master. It spun and danced in the courtyard, catching the moonlight in a dazzling display of refracted light and shimmering colors. Golden fish swam in perfect synchronization, their luminous forms adding an almost mythical quality to the spectacle. It was breathtaking. For a moment, the entire clan seemed to forget to breathe. Their gazes fixed on the boy manipulating a force that few could even comprehend. With a final, graceful motion, Ricky lowered his hands. The vortex began its descent, slowly and carefully. The water returned to the pond without a single drop spilled, its surface smoothing as if nothing had happened. The courtyard fell silent once more. Absolute silence. Then, applause erupted. The younger members of the clan cheered. Their voices rising in excitement. Ricky Gojo. One shouted. The child of power. Another exclaimed. Blessed by God. The older members nodded in approval, their stoic expressions betraying hints of pride. Even Enji, seated at the head, allowed a faint smile to cross his lips. From the balcony, Nico clasped her hands together, a mixture of relief and pride washing over her. Her son had done it. In the center of it all, Ricky stood calmly, his hands falling to his sides. He allowed himself a small, satisfied smirk. Guess I didn't mess it up, he muttered under his breath. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. The night sky stretched endlessly over Tokyo, its neon lights flickering like dying stars. Ricky sat in the backseat of his sleek black car, fingers gripping the latest Naruto volume. The cover gleamed under the streetlights. But his gaze wasn't admiring, it was scrutinizing. Every panel. Every line. Every damn detail. It was his life. His past life. Point to point. He had brushed it off before, thinking it was some twisted cosmic joke. But the more he read, the more the suspicion gnawed at him. This wasn't just coincidence. Someone knew. And enough was enough. He snapped the book shut, jaw tightening. Hina. She adjusted the rearview mirror, not taking her eyes off the road. Yes, young master. Shinjuku. Any particular reason? I need to meet someone. Who? He exhaled slowly, eyes narrowing. Masashi Kishimoto. Hina blinked. The Naruto author. The very same. There was a pause. Then, Hina let out a short laugh, shaking her head as she shifted gears. You're such a big fan, young master. He'll be thrilled. The car roared as it sped through the Tokyo streets. Far away, in a quiet office cluttered with drafts and ink-stained pages, Kishimoto hunched over his desk, scribbling the next chapter of Naruto. His pen moved with precision, his thoughts deep in the fictional world he had crafted over the years. He had no idea. No idea that, at that very moment, a storm was coming. And it had 6 eyes. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. Kishimoto paused mid-sentence at the sound of a knock on his office door. Weird. It was late. Who could it be? The mail. He shrugged. Not important. He had deadlines. He leaned forward. Pen scratching against paper. Boom. The door blasted off its hinges, soaring across the room like a kicked soccer ball before crashing against the bookshelf. Kishimoto shrieked, high-pitched. Undignified, his chair rolling back as his heart slammed against his ribs. His wide, horrified eyes locked onto the doorway. A child stood there. Not just any child, a 10-year-old boy with snow-white hair and eerie, glowing sapphire eyes. His expression was calm. Too calm. Kishimoto swallowed hard. His survival instinct screamed at him to bolt, but his body refused to move. Who are you? He croaked. The boy stepped inside, unbothered, like he owned the place. He stopped just a few feet away, hands in his pockets. You Masashi fucking Kishimoto? He asked, tilting his head. Kishimoto gulped. I am Masashi Kishimoto, only. No fucking included. He forced a nervous chuckle, his fingers twitching toward his phone. What do you want? An autograph. The boy grinned, flashing sharp canines. You have a lot of explaining to do. Kishimoto sat stiffly in his chair, his fingers gripping the armrests like a man about to be thrown off a cliff. The boy in front of him was unnerving, small, yes, but with an unsettling presence that made the air feel heavier. His glowing sapphire eyes practically burned through Kishimoto's skull. The boy's voice was sharp, demanding. Where did you get the idea for writing Naruto? Kishimoto let out a nervous laugh, adjusting his glasses even though they weren't slipping. Oh, that. Well, you see, initially, I envisioned Naruto as an apprentice ramen chef who could transform into a fox. No. It was actually Fox's son. Maybe. I'm too nervous, he nodded to himself, feeling slightly more confident now that he was talking about something familiar. But, after discussions with my editor, the concept evolved into the ninja story we know today. The boy did not look impressed. In fact, his eyes narrowed. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. You're lying. Kishimoto flinched. Excuse me. The boy took a step forward, and suddenly, Kishimoto felt like he was being judged. How do you explain the precise details? The kid pressed. His voice eerily calm. Everything is point to point. Kishimoto blinked. Point to point of what? The boy tilted his head. My past life. The mangaka's brain short-circuited. Quote. The kid didn't blink. I was Naruto Uzumaki before I was reborn into this world. Kishimoto's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. Hua. He shot up from his chair, nearly knocking over his desk. Stop messing around, kid. That's. And then, the boy's glowing sapphire eyes bore into him. Kishimoto's words died in his throat. His mind went blank. The weight of that gaze, it wasn't normal. It wasn't human. His stomach churned. Sweat gathered at his temple. The kid wasn't joking. Kishimoto was losing it. His brain, his career, his very sanity, all of it was hanging by a thread. The boy, still staring at him with those freaky glowing sapphire eyes, took another step forward, his small hands twitching. How? His voice was sharp, accusatory. How did you write everything so accurately? Every detail, every battle, every person. Kishimoto gulped, pressing himself against his desk as if that would somehow protect him. Look, kid, The boy suddenly squinted at him, suspicion flooding his features. Wait, are you an Otsutsuki? His voice rose. Like Kagaya. Or do you have some kind of hidden dojutsu? Ga. What? Kishimoto's hands shot up in panic. How do you know about the Otsutsuki or Kagaya? I haven't even told my editor yet. The boy's lips curled into a slow, victorious smirk. He crossed his arms, tilting his head mockingly. Ooh, so you believe me now, bastard. Kishimoto paled. He did. And that was the real problem. Kishimoto's breathing was uneven, his mind scrambling for logic. This is a prank. A dream. Maybe I'm having a mental breakdown from all those deadlines. There was only one way to prove this kid was bluffing. Alright, Naruto Uzumaki, he said, forcing a nervous chuckle. If you're really him, then answer me this. He adjusted his glasses, eyes narrowing. What was Naruto's first word as a baby? The boy snorted. Easy. Miso. Kishimoto nearly swallowed his tongue. That was in my original notes. I never even told my editor. Fine. Maybe a lucky guess. What about his favorite hiding spot as a toddler? Under Ichiraku's counter, the boy answered instantly. Tuki let me sit there while he prepped the broth. I used to doodle on the wood with a kunai. Kishimoto's jaw dropped. He never published that. Not even in the databooks. Not in any interview. This kid, this little monster, was answering every question like he'd lived it. His hands trembled. Oh okay. He stammered, now desperate. What was the name of the first person Naruto ever killed? The boy's sapphire eyes darkened. A rapist, he said, voice quieter. I don't remember his name. He begged before I did it. Though it wasn't in the anime or manga. Kishimoto's blood ran cold. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a dream. This kid knew everything. So, I'll be the new co-writer. Kishimoto blinked, trying to process what had just been said. His mind was spinning. He took a deep breath, squinting at the smug grin plastered on Ricky's face. The kid's sapphire eyes were gleaming with absolute confidence. Like he knew something Kishimoto didn't. Wait, Kishimoto stammered, trying to regain some semblance of control. You want to co-write Naruto with me? You. A 10-year-old with glowing eyes. Yep, Ricky said, popping the P. See, old man, your writing's, well, kinda garbage. Especially when it comes to female characters. Honestly, I've read Naruto, it's like you don't even know what to do with Sakura. Come on. She is important, not just plot devices for Naruto to have someone to save. Kishimoto recoiled. Ouch. Kids not pulling punches. You also make some really dumb logic choices. You let the studio add unnecessary fillers, Ricky continued, pacing back and forth with an exaggerated flair, like he was an angry critic. Like when EY made Sakura slap Naruto every 5 minutes in the early chapters. What was that about? Does she just keep getting confused about what she's supposed to be mad at? He scoffed, as if the very idea was offensive. And don't even get me started on the whole Sasuke obsession thing. You're supposed to be telling a story about Naruto, not about Sasuke's internal monologue. Kishimoto's face reddened. This was the kind of feedback no writer wanted to hear, especially from a kid. And then, Ricky added, you just overcomplicate things. Like, when did chakra and ninjutsu get so convoluted? It's like you're just throwing rules out the window as long as you get to make some crazy fight scene happen. The boy's grin widened, clearly enjoying himself. But that's why I'm here, old man. I'll bring the clarity to the plot, the depth to your characters, and I'll fix your god-awful pacing. Oh, and maybe, we'll make Sakura less like wallpaper, huh? Kishimoto felt a bead of sweat drip down his forehead. This kid is something else. So, Ricky said, putting his hands behind his head and leaning back with a self-assured grin. What do you say? I'll be your equal co-author. Not some sidekick, not some junior writer. Equal. Kishimoto was about to respond when Ricky's grin turned into a smirk. Unless, of course, you wanna add late to your resume. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of fans who would love to see the great Masashi Kishimoto finally finish Naruto, before we all die of old age. Kishimoto blinked, stunned into silence. Do I have a choice? He asked weakly, his hands shaking slightly as he stared at the kid who apparently, was about to hijack his entire creative process. Ricky's grin never faltered. Not unless you want your reputation to be as late as the last two Naruto films. So, what'll it be? Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis. As Hina sat in the car, she drummed her fingers on the steering wheel, glancing at the clock. 10 p.m. Why here, of all places? Shouldn't an author like Kishimoto have an office or something? Her thoughts were interrupted when Ricky strode back to the car, a parchment in hand and a grin stretched across his face. She raised an eyebrow. So, you got the autograph, young master. Ricky slid into the seat, holding up the parchment triumphantly. Even better, this is a contract. I'm now his company author. Equal. Hina blinked. What? How? Ricky smirked, rolling the paper in his hand. Let's just say, he was thoroughly impressed by my ideas to expand and rewrite his story. Hina stared at him, then at the crumpled remains of what was once a door in the distance. Thoroughly impressed, huh? That's it for today, I will stop here. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you please consider subscribe and make sure to hit that like button, share with your friends, and don't forget to check out author of this story. Details in description.